Over 3,000 people have registered for today's program. It is my pleasure to officially welcome you to the Jakarta Post 10th webinar, Jakpost Up Close, Reimagining the Future of Indonesia's Economy. My name is Yunindita. I am a journalist for the Jakarta Post, and I will be your MC for today's program. The Jakarta Post has been hosting webinar after webinar in the past few months, but specifically this one is part of our celebration of Indonesia's 75 years of independence, our way of celebrating Indonesia's 75 years of resilience. With that, we would like to not only highlight the challenges that we have overcome as a nation, but to also pave the way for discourse in regards to the challenges that we are facing at the moment with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Along that line, we would also like to look ahead to reimagine what the future may hold for Indonesia's economy. Before we start, I would like to explain our agenda today. We will start our program with a 50-minute talk show between Finance Minister Sri Mulyani Indrawati and the Jakarta Post Deputy Managing Editor Esther Samboh. Following that, we will have a short break accompanied with a video from the Jakarta Post multimedia team. And after that, we will commence our webinar featuring 7 distinguished guests serving as today's discussion panel. The discussion panel will be moderated by the Jakarta Post editor Prima Wirayani and will last for around 70 minutes. That will be followed with a Q&A session for around 40 minutes. I'm honored to introduce to you the distinguished individuals speaking on today's program. We are very excited to have them on our platform. We have Finance Ministry Special Advisor Masyita Crystallin, former Indonesian Finance Minister Chatib Basri. We have World Bank Lead Economist for Indonesia, Frederico. We have Indonesia's Employer Association Vice Chairwoman Shinta Kamdani. We have Sequoia Capital India Managing Director Abheek Anand. We have Prudential Indonesia President Director Reisch. And last but not least, we have OFO President Director Karaniya Dharmasaputra. With that, I would like to give the screen to Esther. Esther, the platform is yours.
Thank you, Dita. Good afternoon, everyone. And once again, thank you for your participation. Joining us today is Her Excellency Ibu Sri Mulyani Indrawati, Finance Minister of the Republic of Indonesia. Good afternoon, Ibu Ani. Apa kabar, Bu? How are you?
I'm good, Esther. How are you?
I'm good. Confused at the moment, but good in overall. It's an honor to have you with us today. And I think it's a critical time as well, since today we are celebrating Indonesia's 75 years of independence at a time when the nation is facing extreme challenges during the pandemic. Some economic theorists believe that during crisis, the role of the government is bigger than ever before, as the one element of the society that could spend big to drive the economy. The Indonesian government itself has estimated millions of people at risk of losing jobs and falling into poverty, while a lot of businesses are severely hit, with some having stopped operations. Before going into the first question, the Jakarta Post team has prepared a short video playback, Bu Ani, from our interview with you 4 years ago in 2016. You may or may not remember this, but we have one of your best quotes ever in history, I personally think. I believe then you just returned from Washington, D.C., being formerly Managing Director and Chief Operating Officer of the World Bank. You were to assume the role as Finance Minister in President Joko Widodo's first term. And in the interview, you were asked the risk of complacency having been reappointed as Finance Minister again, a position you had held before in the past administration from 2005 to 2010. The video playback, please.
Karena itu yang mungkin tantangan paling berat ya kalau Anda mengambil pekerjaan yang sama. Anda bisa mudah sekali tergelincir dengan sikap-sikap saya udah tahu. Karena itu adalah sebetulnya telling myself almost every morning and every night that you still have the energy to learn, to listen, to see, and then design and define. I hope I still have this kind of capacity.
So by the look of your face, I figure you may not remember this quote at all, but this is important. I feel that telling yourself almost every morning and every night that you still have the energy to learn, to listen, and then to design and define, hopefully, good policies. That's a really powerful statement, but humbling at the same time. 4 years later, today, Indonesia is experiencing global pandemic with severe impact on the domestic economy. I'm curious to know your biggest learnings and takeaways that define the policies you are shaping today. This will be very interesting, especially considering your unique position, Bu Ani. You are the Finance Minister of the Republic of Indonesia, but also a parent and a grandmother. So based on your learnings and takeaways so far, how are you building the foundation for the future of the local economy? How do you envision Indonesia's economy to look like in the future for your children and grandchildren and the future generation?
Well, thank you, Esther. My first response to that interview is be careful with what you wish for. And I think in this case that you wish that you are not going to be like, have the feeling that, oh, I know everything, I've been there, done that. So you really don't have to like feel that you really need to do something extra work. This COVID is actually providing a very, very good and at the same time a very tough lesson to all of us. When we are entering the situation in which the enemy, or in this case the challenge, is as tough as COVID-19, yeah, which threatening the life of the people, it's like constraining the people activity, and then the consequences is the economic activity becoming paralyzed or cannot work optimally. That's really a challenge which is non-traditional or conventional, even if you compare with our own professional experience, beginning as an economist and then experiencing 97, 98 financial crisis that is leading to the economic political change in Indonesia. And then also 2008, 2009, then we have a global financial crisis that have huge implication also for the economy in Indonesia. And after that, I think during all those situations, we have boom and bust of the commodity. I think this time is really challenging almost the whole structure of the way we live as a country, as a nation. And that is exactly a real test for all of us. Your question regarding what is going to be, and my even statement before that, I do hope that I still have a fire in my belly to really define and design and define what is actually really important and really fundamental for the Indonesia moving forward. Because the theme of this seminar or meeting today is reimagining the future. So basically, I'm not talking the reimagining, but really building for the future. Because if it is reimagining, you can imagine anything freely. But if you're really building for the future, this is like, first, you really need to have an imagination, idea. And then from the idea, you have to be able to translate it into what is the workable policy. Then you have to be able to implement it. And you have pretty much confidence that those implementation is according or following consistently the idea or the imagination that I have. So in this case, we are imagining or not reimagining, because I think what is the imagination of our founding father regarding what is going to be the Indonesia looks like as a country who was just born in 1945 was actually very noble and really like still very much fit and suited with the situation that we are having. We want to have a country which is free. We have a country which actually want to create prosperity and equitable prosperity for all. We want to become a nation among all the nations in the world, that we are going to continue contribute to what we call it a peaceful and prosperity of the world, based on just and equitability. And that is actually something which we are all longing and striving for. And that is exactly the imagination that we have to really create. Of course, along the way, there will be quite a lot of challenge. It could be like political challenge, sometimes military incursion, sometimes also the threat of the secessionists. We also have the boom and bust of the commodity, from the oil price only $3 to become $12, to become $30, to become $100. We have coal, we have many other mining, and then we come with the CPO. We also have the manufacturing sector, which is being built. We have urbanization, moving population from the village into the urban area. These are all the journey that we are having in order for all of us to create and to build and to move closer to the imagination and goals or the idea that we have when we actually declare our freedom. Now the question, what is going to be need to be done in each of the period? Of course, it's always like moving, but first, for a country to become a great country, there is no great country without great people. So basically, it's always the human center. That is the human being, that is the people of Indonesia. So the question is, what is actually difference between when we were born? Maybe at that time, the population is only 60, 70 million, with now 265 or 67 million. What is different? Is it only because of the quantity, that is now we are multiplied by 3? Or this is much more fundamental challenge that we are having? I think there are quite a lot of discussion about the demographic opportunity and challenge. But for sure, imagining Indonesia in the future is nonsense without imagining what is going to be looks like the people of Indonesia by that time in the future. Where is their role, position, and of course, we are talking about prosperity, well-being, their participation, their productivity, their ability to adapt and adjust to the future. That is going to be continue changing. Now, if you look at the today's situation, we achieve a lot. For example, if we talk about participation rate of the children in a primary school, it is 100%. But whether they are participating in the school equal to be literate, and at the same time they have the critical thinking or have the ability to get the skill that preparing them for the future. That's another different challenge that we may have. When we talk about whether the children under 5, they have the mortality that can be reduced or has already been reduced. Yes, we achieve some of them, but we are still having those which is still left behind, or those who actually have the survivability beyond 5 years old. They are still actually threatening by other equally daunting situation, for example, like stunting. So basically, I think imagining the future, we really have to deal with what is the demography, which is for Indonesia still mainly young. We really have to invest a lot. You are talking about that now, the difference between 20 years ago or 30 years ago when I was a young economist, I have children or I even have the grandchildren. So I always feel that it's not only my grandchildren or my children, but the well-being of all children of Indonesia, which is particularly important. Now with that, then the question about whether as a country we provide them with an equal opportunity. If they live and born, the children were born from the family which is poor, most likely that they don't have equal opportunity to get a quality of health, education, or even social safety net. So this is the 3 most important thing. And we actually, during this COVID, the budget that President just submitted to the Parliament on the 14th of August, we want to use this COVID to become a momentum to reform all those very important things for the people of Indonesia. Health reform, education reform, social safety net reform. That is the basic for imagining the Indonesia future in which the people is going to be the core. The equality of opportunity, the equality of basic services for Indonesia people, especially those who still lag behind, is going to be very critical. And then we are talking about in the future or today even, we still lack of infrastructure. People may be, some of us enjoying the mobility now because of the toll road from Jakarta to Surabaya. Everybody now can report that, oh, I'm traveling from Jakarta to Semarang, my hometown. It's only now less than 5 hours. I think some people enjoy that, but that is only like just a few examples of the achievement. We still need to build more infrastructure because Indonesia have a huge infrastructure gap. This is not only Java, it's also another island which is still like behind. We are still not yet finishing Sumatra road or highway in this case, or we are talking about Kalimantan, we are talking about Sulawesi, we are talking about Papua, we are talking about Maluku or all the Nusa Tenggara, Timor or Barat. These are all the ideas that we really need to realize that infrastructure is still needed for a country who actually just passed the middle income, lower middle income country to become middle, slightly upper. I think there is really a need that we really need to have and to build. The third is Indonesia cannot move or imagining the future without a good institution. I mean, we are lucky to have a democracy, vibrant. Everybody can always complain about whether this democracy with a lot of political party, the transaction cost is going to be high. But this is actually the way we are going to put all the people of Indonesia to be able to participate in an open, transparent, and free, have a freedom for them to express themselves. I mean, that is very important. But that is only just the basic. Democracy cannot become an instrument to create prosperity for all without a good institution, legal framework, law enforcement, efficient bureaucracy, clean bureaucracy. This is one of the themes that I always talk since long time ago when I was still young and was finance minister. I'm still young now, Esther, but continue young, hopefully. But that is really, without those good, clean, efficient bureaucracy and political system and legal framework, I don't think that Indonesia can have a better future for all in a more equitable way. So that is maybe if you're talking about what is going to be the legacy that you want to see for the Indonesia in the future. You're asking about my children, my grandchildren, but I actually thinking about more all the children of Indonesia. I think they deserve to have that the equal opportunity, services, public services, which is good quality for all, not only for those who have or who has the prosperity, and especially also the infrastructure that allowing people to have the mobility, productivity, then it should be supported by the good institution, especially on the public, but also private side, because I think corporation is also need to have to be efficient and competitive. So hopefully that answered your first question.
That really did answer my first question, Bu Ani. Thank you very much. And please, Bu, note that I know and we all understand you are still young at heart, so no worries about that. And
thank you, Esther.
And thank you for your remarks as well, Ibu Ani. That's very encouraging to hear. As President Joko Widodo said, Indonesia has a 2045 vision in the pipeline. The vision is to be a developed country with per capita income of 270 million per year. That translates into 22.5 million earnings per person on average for Indonesians. The theme that we take today, reimagining the future of Indonesia's economy, is basically the thinking behind that is that the pandemic, so you have all the agenda on human capital development as laid out last year, and then the pandemic hit, and then this question is how that affects that vision for 2045, and what are the risks if we fail to survive in the economic recovery.
Well, if I can divide into two, that I'm sure maybe the next panelist is going to discuss. What is fundamental and structural? What is maybe more a short term in which we have to recover the economy, or maybe even in this case to save the people for this threatening disease of COVID-19. That is something, how we are going to deal with the short term challenge. without losing sight of what we call it the fundamental and structural issue of the Indonesia that need to be addressed. What I said earlier, because we are talking imagining the future or reimagining the future, is all the foundation which is really needed for a country to be our aspiring higher income country in 2045 in this case. But we are now facing with a very pressing short-term challenge like COVID. So the question how you are going to be able to deal with this situation without losing sight or while at the same time also addressing the fundamental issue. This is exactly what is the theme of our budget 2021 of forward or onward in this case, is that the question about how we are going to use this momentum of COVID crisis to actually triggering more reform, which is fundamentally important for the medium and long term of Indonesia. As I said, COVID is a threat, health threat for the people. And that's why we allocate not only resources, money, but also all the policy and attention of the government in dealing with this COVID-19. And that's why the effort made by President by establishing gugus tugas or satgas, and then cascading to the local government, how we even use and involving non-traditional player on a health, for example, like police or military, in order for us to be able to use all the resource in order for us to be able to deal with this COVID. Because this is really a challenge of all multiple dimensions. How you are going to educate people to wear masks? I mean, in Indonesia, even in the United States, they don't convince of wearing masks. I mean, it seems like simple, but it is really a challenging. How you are going to educate people to become a social distancing so you can still see each other, but there is a healthy distance. There is a new protocol that we really have to all abide and follow in order for us to be able to then continue having the activity and recovering the social and economic activity without compromising on this threat of the COVID. That is really a challenge. Then we look at all the area which is damaged more severely and directly by the COVID, whether this is the people who just suddenly unemployed, becoming poor, or the small medium enterprises which cannot really have the informal sector activity can be actually done because of this social distancing or because of the work from home and all those. This is really the area that we use all the policy instrument in order for us to really addressing the most important short-term situation at this moment without, as I said, losing sight of what is really important. We discussed quite a lot, for example, like the middle income trap. That is more fundamental issue. Human capital again, innovation and productivity, infrastructure, and also the efficiency of the bureaucracy or the cost of doing business or ease doing business in Indonesia that need to be addressed. I think that is still continue very important. Many of those agenda is still being done. Maybe now overlook or in this case is not being the headline because people really see the headline more on a COVID, but government is still continue addressing this issue. I think that is more critical. And then of course we are using our instrument, for example, like in my cases, of course, the fiscal instrument, which is now playing a very important role because people, consumption, business, they are all also hit hard by this COVID. So government has to do a very extra work, using more resources in order for us to be able to rescue and to actually help to catalyze more activity so that they are going to be returned. But I have to admit that this COVID is not like 97, 98 or 2008, 2009. At that time, maybe we focus on what was the situation like the financial crisis in which companies or banks, they are all damaged by the crisis. And the way we are going to restructure is how the balance sheet becoming healthy again, and then they are moving again. today we are not only dealing with the balance sheet. Some of the companies or banks, they are affected by this declining activity because of the COVID. And this declining cannot can you tomorrow act normal again? No, because tomorrow is still have a COVID. So how you are going to make sure that this can be actually, they can survive the resiliency, if you can call it that way, the resiliency of the company, the business, banking sector, financial sector, they have the ability to survive of this, what you call it, prolonged and still it still exists, the threat of this COVID is still hovering and hanging there. And that is exactly the most difficult part for all of us. I mean, as an economist, you hear so many analysts and people commenting, you really have to deal with the demand and supply. Yeah, that's exactly what we are doing. But really like recreating, rebuilding, and reviving the demand side when the COVID is still threatening the people is not going to be just straightforward by putting more money for them. Or you are going to be restoring or recovering the production side cannot be done. I mean, even if you talk about manufacturing, if they reopen their manufacturing, they have to make sure that the protocol health, and that means that they are not allowing all the labor to come to the same site. So there is space and so on. Even when you are opening your restaurant, you can no longer have like the full packed people in your restaurant. You have to have a spacing, or the flight in this case, the airline, you are not allowed to have all the seats to be occupied. So these are all, it's not as easy just putting more money and can you operate again. This have a totally changed. And that's why what I'm saying that even as a veteran like myself, as a finance minister, this is something really very challenging, and maybe it's going to be longer than what originally maybe people expect. I mean, I personally also see when I look and Googling the Spanish flu in 1918, it takes more than 2 years, but people will not be patient. I mean, after 1 month lockdown, I want to just go out. I don't want to be at home. I mean, and this is not only Indonesia. Many countries has been now. I heard this morning, I just looked, Argentina, they are upset in Buenos Aires after lockdown. And then people now, no, there is another outbreak. Then they are going to lock down. They are very angry. Melbourne, just like close to our country in Australia. Yes, a week ago, the Minister of Finance of Australia talked to me by phone, and I asked him, what is the feeling of the people? Yeah, they're getting more impatient with this. So we're talking about the people mind, people heart, people expectation, anxiety, hope. And at the same time, we have to deal with the economy, which need to be maintained to be able to survive this kind of situation. And this is not only about money, or it's about more resources to be poured to the economy, but also our ability to organize ourselves to be able to deal with this threatening health issue, while at the same time making sure that the foundation of the economy and social activity will not be eroded or can be damaged permanently by this disease. So it's really a tough policy environment for all countries in the world, I think.
So absolutely understandable, Bu Ani, and that's exactly why I mentioned earlier that when you ask me, how are you? I'm good, but confused. This is a really confusing time indeed, as you mentioned. But it's good to know that the government is not losing sight, despite the fact that most of the attention now is directed into containing COVID, because after all, a healthy nation is a prosperous nation, right? So as a journalist, I myself have been feeling quite the experience of the roller coaster of the pandemic so far, especially for the state budget. I think throughout the history, at least for my short span of history, I witnessed how the state budget can be so flexible to account for the latest dynamics. As you mentioned, things keep on changing. One day we are all locked down, another day we are in quarantine, self-quarantine, and another day we are impatient and just go out there. We cannot help ourselves, right?
Yeah.
But the government has allocated funds, trillions of rupiah to contain the COVID-19 pandemic. As we all know, you have also rolled out one of the most breakthroughs policies, I might say, the burden sharing scheme with the central bank. I think Indonesia is quite ahead of the curve on that note. However, despite all these achievements, state budget disbursement so far has been low, with only 39% of overall state budget disbursed as of June this year. And the budget disbursement for COVID containment measures are even lower at 20% as of August 5 this year. This is, I can say, frustrating for many. And I share President Joko Widodo's firm remarks in a cabinet meeting in late June. I believe you firmly remember this as well. The president said, and I quote, "All the money that's supposed to be for the people is stuck there." So on this note, can you share more insights surrounding problems in the state budget disbursement? What is it about disbursing the state budget that takes up most of the time?
Well, first, the budget indeed changed dramatically because we are facing with the extraordinary situation and challenge. And I'm very thankful, really appreciate the support, political support from the parliament, that they understand that this is really a non-ordinary situation. So when the president submitting the extraordinary law or Perpu in this case, and they then agree and they accept those emergency law and now become law number 2. And that is the basic for us to be able to manage what you call it, the most uncertain situation. I mean, if you ask about the assessment about what is going to be happen with our economy, I mean, first we know that if COVID really spreading, as we all see in many countries globally, more now 22 million, and still actually not peaking yet. The question about that the activity of the economy is going to be paralyzed, and that means the revenue will be dropped for the government. And then the need for us to first saving the people from this threat, from the health sector, definitely need to be provided with the adequate resource to make sure that the country can be able to actually respond to this threat. So the budget for the health sector has been dramatically increased. And then we also expand for the social safety net, more than 200 for the social safety net that is actually provided and expanded, and even through a very non-conventional way. For example, from the cash, non-cash transfer up to the discount for their electricity bill, as well as Kartu Prakerja, that is pre-work card, including converting the fund for the village to become the social safety net. These are all, I mean, using all the instrument available to make sure that we are being able to actually protect and provide support for the people in general. And then for the small medium enterprises, more than 120 million has been actually allocated for that, for repayment of the debt that will be delayed, up to the subsidy of the interest, or even we provide a grant, productive grant for them, so that they are going to be able to not only survive but starting again. And then we provide guarantee risk sharing for the new working capital. I mean, all has been actually designed and allocated. Then the problem on the execution, when you mentioned about the ability to absorb, when President asking the money should be flushed to the people or to the economy, and then flushing it doesn't mean like just you flush the toilet. In this case, you really like have to flush, and then somebody is going to audit you. So the question about who's the target? Are they really, there is a name, there is an address, there is an account number? Are they really the targeted group, which is supposed to be like following the policy design? So you talk about data. And then if you have the most updated data or that data need to be updated, you talk about the system to disburse. Is it going to be through banking system or through post office or by providing with a staple good like sembako, or what else that you want to do? These are all the evolution that we actually try within the last 3 months. There are so many design of the policy that we actually discuss, or maybe think initially we want to do this and then the data is like that, and then we have to reshaping or redesigning, and then we saw there is a constraint on the implementation, then we have to modify it again. These are all the situations, not to mention that some of the minister is really a new minister, Esther. I mean, I was like thinking that all ministers like me, which I know the bureaucracy, I know the policy, I know the budget document, but no, of course, some of the ministers is just totally new, that they never actually worked in the government before. So for them, really, like when they see like COVID hit, their original budget need to be shift. Some of them of the spending need to be cut, and then some of them to be reprioritized, and then new money coming for the new priority. So these are all like 3 different challenges that they really need to manage while we are all working from home. So if we are not working from home, at least they actually can be in the office 24 hours or 1 week. They are not like dismissing all their stuff and they can discuss intensely, but we actually have to do it through this kind of video. So this is really like a real, I don't want to use the perfect storm, but it's really like all the challenge together that is really testing any government in the world. So I'm not saying just Indonesia, even all countries in the world, they are actually talking about what else. As I said, I talked to the minister from Australia, we talked with Singapore, with Malaysia, I mean, with Philippines. These are all, they are, what are you doing? Why you're changing the policy? They sometimes see the, oh, okay, this is the voice of the people, this is the aspiration from the business, this is the situation that they see, they look at the data, oh, then I have to do this one. So basically, this is exactly what the government is doing. So the implementation now is the focus. And that's why we look, what is actually on a health sector that we cannot spend, or is actually already adequate. So the resource actually being allocated more than what is really needed. That is one thing. If that's so, then we actually don't have to spend it, but we really have to design it in a way. For example, like the hospital upgrade, now the supply of the protecting gear, ventilator at that time, test kit. Now we are talking about vaccine. The vaccine, I mean, all the possibility of vaccine, who's going to produce, how much, when, how we are going to pay, if the price is different from this manufacturing to another manufacturing, how you are going to actually treat that kind of thing, right? Never before in such a very complicated, but you really have to make that decision. And all other need to be done. And then we are talking about like small, medium enterprises. What is the database that we have? It said that we have 60 million more of small, medium enterprises. Do we know where they are? By name, by address, by location, by what? That is all then talking about, again, data, design, policy, and how you are going to implement. I think what I'm saying is that at this moment, all ministers has been like looking like under microscope. What are you doing? I mean, do you know that you really have to disburse this money? If you know, why it is not disbursing this week? Because we really now providing, the Ministry of Finance, we are providing to the president, to the VP, to all the ministers, hey, look, you are supposed to disburse this much money this month. And then suddenly the minister, I mean, many ministers, I think in the past, they are not really realize that they really have to go down to the detail. President is asking, this is the time that you are all ministers have to look at the very detail, really like working very micro detail on what you need to do in this current situation. I mean, the good side is actually, well, with this intensity of the like video conf discussion, I mean, we virtually can work 24 hours, like every hours, like back to back to back. So I'm lucky to have at least a break and discussing with you all today. But basically, we are just like chasing like crazy at this moment. So we are working very look at the very detail. Yeah.
Thank you, Bu. And I'm glad you consider this as a break for you. If you put it that way, actually your answer highlights the human side of the story on the administrative coordination, wisdom, and leadership. I feel it does take a village to manage an office. I'm just hopeful that the villagers are coordinating well and the village leaders are stepping up to learn faster and speed up disbursement effectively and transparently with accountability as well. With that in mind, my next question is that, do you think that the state budget deficit will then reach the planned 6.34% of the GDP? Or is there any chance that it will be lower considering the recent updates?
Well, the deficit is one thing. People really, maybe some of the economists, analysts really obsess and look at the deficit, but we really have to look at the more detail about what led to this deficit in this case. The deficit is because of the revenue drop. And in this case, we have to look at whether the business survive, or if they survive, how severe this COVID reducing their revenue, so that their payment of the debt, the payment of their tax is going to be affected by that. It is lucky that they are still survived. That maybe they survive, but they are loss making at this moment, so they don't pay taxes because there is no profit, right? So that kind of thing that we really have to look, and everybody have to look at. This is very uncertain. Look at how you look at the people, whether they are being fired or they are dirumahkan, in this case they're furlough, if you call it that way, or you are talking about small medium enterprises in which, as I said earlier, the volume of your activity is significantly reduced. So I met with many of the business community, some of even the media. They are talking about Ibu, we are surviving, we are really struggling at this moment. We really need some other business telling that we can only survive for 9 months. After that, we don't know. We are not actually what do you call it, firing the people yet, but we cannot survive beyond this month. So there are so many signals telling about that, and that is definitely also affecting our revenue side. If revenue drops, even if we are not spending more, that is, the deficit is going to happen. And then on the spending side, as I said, we are providing like the 695 trillion for the COVID-related spending, in addition or on top of our original spending for the ministry as well as local government. So if the ministry, local government, and this additional COVID-related spending can be executed, like let's say 95% or 98%, then hopefully they are actually following, as you also mentioned earlier, hopefully that they are not to be corrupted, they are really well targeted, they are really like benefiting the people. I think that is going to be the best case for all of us. But it could be like there is a constraint. And what is the constraint? I've already said very detailed earlier. So if that cannot be absorbed, then there is like spending which is not being spent, then it's going to reduce the deficit. So these are all the two factors that we are going to continue monitor until the end of this fiscal year. And we are still hopeful that of course the fiscal plan of 6.34 is going to be continue in that level. With our Perpu, that is law number 2/2020, there is no limit of deficit. We can slightly below or maybe higher than what we have. There is no consequence legally, unlike the situation before in which we have the maximum limit of 3% of deficit. But what is more important for the government at this moment is actually we really want to see each of these elements have the very important dimension on the economic and social situation of the people. That is the prosperity or condition. And that's why the question about if the revenue drop, because it's actually showing that the economy is really under huge pressure. That's alarm for us. If the revenue drop because we're providing incentive, it's fine. So it's the same indicator, but two different explanations that have to make us responding differently. If the spending is actually can be executed by almost 99% or 100%, and they are well targeted and really well divided, that's good. If the spending 99%, but the quality of spending is questionable, that's alarm. So even with the same disbursement, you are not going to just jump into the conclusion. So that is exactly more like the detail of the work that we really need to pay attention. Not to mention like local government. We are talking about 1/3 of the spending is actually depend on local government. And each local government capacity, leadership, ability to deliver is all different, from provincial to kabupaten and then cities. So these are all another that we really need to support. But despite all those challenges, it doesn't mean that then we are just excusing ourselves with all those stories. But we really not, okay, if there is a problem, what else, what solution, what response we should do. And for the Ministry of Finance, meaning that I asked all my team to really like work like crazy. I mean, every week we really look at the development of the budget. Is there anything, indicators that showing that we have silver lining, the light of the tunnel, of the end of the tunnel, or this is more declining? Sometimes one week we feel, oh, we are hopeful, and then another week we feel why the curve is not going to what we expect. So we all have to look at again. So I mean, it's really data driven, indicator driven, but at the same time we have to then respond more. Go ahead.
So on that note, the government actually has the National Economic Recovery Program, or the PEN,
Yes,
to soften the pain for local businesses, especially. Can you share, and you and the people as well? And you mentioned earlier that this recovery will take probably longer time than expected. How do you foresee this National Economic Recovery Program to run next year and potentially the next? Do you think the program will run for 2 other years, or how, in terms of time span, how long do you see the businesses needing support in terms of tax relaxation? And this is related as well again to your point on the pressure for state revenue.
Well, for this year, definitely we provide, for example, like the incentive for the business in terms of all the tax facility, from the employment tax, the imported tax, value added tax, corporate tax. These are all that you are providing relaxation or forbearance or discount or delay. These are all we providing until the end of this year. And that's really cost us around 125 trillion. We are not sure whether these are going to be really used, the usage of all this facility. And then for next year, we've already put on our budget plan something which is also similar. Some of this facility can be extended beyond January, beyond December. And then also the social safety net, some of them is going to be continue maintained for next year. Because then the question about whether next year we are going to face with a normal situation or half normal or a quarter normal, we don't know. Then we talk about the vaccine, how much vaccine will be bought, how much will be distributed, how many people is going to be vaccinated. These are all very moving, indicator or issue that need to be considered. But the fiscal policy is actually providing those scenario for that some of the social safety nets, some of the incentive support for the business, it will be continued. Not all of them, some, because we are expecting a slightly better situation next year. technically, of course, for this year, the Q2 has been contracted by 5.3, and now we're talking about the third quarter. Some indicators showing that the contraction is still continue until mid of August, but maybe not as deep, but maybe still in a negative zone territory. We will look at the September. If there is no second wave, Jakarta is still continue normalized, and all the other provincial area in Java is going to be relatively better, then there is a hope that August and September is going to be continue recovery. But recovery doesn't mean like from -5 into jump to 5. Recovery is meant like we are closing to 0 because last year is high enough. So catching up with last year level is a struggle when you have this COVID. And then we talk about the last quarter for 2020, which we hope that the situation is going to be better. With all, of course, the notes that there will be no second wave. I mean, all other countries doing the have a second wave and re-lockdown again. So these are all the scenario that we have. With that, this year we are going to expect maybe the growth can be maintained at around 0 level. It can be plus minus slightly above that level. This is what the government now scenario for 2020. Next year, because we are baseline this year down, next year, hopefully technical rebound is going to be possible, but really going up to the level that we want is really depend on the normalization. There are a couple of good things that we do hope that first, the macroeconomic continue will be maintained prudent but supportive. And then some reform will provide confidence. We do hope that the omnibus law can be passed. So it will create what you call it, the reputation of the Indonesia that even during this COVID hit hard, Indonesia is still doing a very difficult and serious reform. So when all the headline of COVID is going to be on the second line, not the headline, and the first line headline is going to be who's going to recover and ready to recover, Indonesia hopefully is on those headlines. That is exactly what we want in 2021 so that we are going to be able to catch up what is actually left behind. The budget is really supporting those scenarios. So for example, like the infrastructure will be accelerated again. Some of the support incentive for the business will be continue and maintain. Ease of doing business hopefully is going to be continue improve, and all those things that hopefully it can create confidence for the business community as well as the consumer.
So we highly appreciate the move that the state budget will be directed next year for economic recovery and reforms as well, Bu Ani, especially since, of course, we will need a lot of money for our healthcare workers, small business owners, workers, and teachers, and parents who are teaching our future generation distant learning. That has been very difficult. These people are indeed the heroes of modern independent Indonesia today. So with that, micro, small, and medium enterprises have been the backbone of Indonesia's economy. Some scholars are saying that these MSMEs will play a pivotal role to weather the ongoing crisis. As we all know, we are somehow connected to small businesses, local small businesses. Either our neighbors or our family members run or are connected to a small business. Even I myself today, head to toe, I'm wearing products from small businesses. How do you see the state budget supporting these MSMEs in the future, and how could average Indonesians, not only the government, support economic recovery in this sense?
Well, Esther, you actually just pointed a very important, the role of everybody in this COVID. They are all equally important. So don't just expect and rely that this is only the government who have the role and responsibility to do that. Each of you can actually contribute significantly, at least if on the contribution about your mindset and your constructive attitude. That's also, if you multiply by 260 million people, that means a lot. And if you even do more, the innovative thing, like you are like by design, you try to buy something from the Warung Tegal close to your places, You bought all your friends who suddenly now unemployed in a hotel. They were chef or sous chef or whatever that they are now opening. They are selling whatever, the food. I think that is also something, what you call it, the social solidarity is creating what you call it a very strong social fabric and resilience of this country. Now, despite that, of course, the government is continue doing their part. So the support for the small medium enterprises, as you mentioned, because of not only the number is very big, around 64 million, but also their function of safety net is very, very critical. Employment creation, resiliency of the country. So the government providing quite a lot of support. Tax has been freed or paid by the government. They are providing by the relaxation of the payment of their principal. They are providing subsidy of their interest rate. They are providing with the additional now what you call it grant by the government for those who actually very, very small. We call it ultra micro. And then for those who's medium, we are lending or borrowing below 500 million or up to even 1 trillion. We providing, if they are labor intensive, we're providing with many of the support from the interest subsidy up to the insurance or guarantee for their borrowing. These are all the government providing. Some of the idea about buying Indonesia product, I think that can be done and promoted by all of you so that we are actually creating a lot of resiliency. Don't forget also in this case, while the government really focusing on the 45 or 50% below, there are middle upper class who actually can play a very important. Those who may be in an ordinary normal situation, they spend their income, their resources for traveling, for eating out, and so on. I think they can still continue providing that kind of support on the society, maybe without compromising or creating a problem with the COVID spread. So these are all, I mean, we are all doing our best. We are going through many institutions, from the very formal, like a banking institution, through the non-banking institution. For example, like we have PMN, we have Pegadaian, we have cooperation, koperasi, we have bank wakaf. These are all the channels that the government all using, because we want to reach as many as possible for the small medium enterprises so that they are going to be able to enjoy the government support for them. But the most important is actually, despite the government support, is their own resiliency, that they have to survive if they want to survive, and they continue very productive and resilience. I think that is the most important one. So we will do that. And of course, from the demand side, we try to work also. So if we talk about government support for the small household, we do hope that they are going to buy the Indonesian product, that is the small medium enterprises product. Now I heard that some of the banking SOE is going to have the fashion because of Agustusan, that is the 17th of August. We want to present it to the people, that you actually can have a fashion show by the video conference like that, and then people can buy that product from all the designers. I heard some artists still doing their own film making during this kind of constraint. So I heard and I received so many those people who try to continue productive, creative, even under this kind of situation. And they are at a very small size. Sometimes their size is really not really that big, but they showing that what you call it, their spirit, their fighting spirit against all odds. I think that is the most important. And that is really a hero, as you mentioned earlier. They are the true hero under this situation. So we really appreciate. But the government will do all our best, considering that, of course, there is always a constraint, whether, as I said earlier, data, the system, and so on. but at least we are transparent as possible. We are as transparent as possible. This is what we are doing. This is the resource that we are providing. This is the mechanism. So please provide us with so many feedback. I think like in a pre-work atau kartu prakerja in this case, when people reacted, oh, this is easily manipulated, and so government then changed, reset again, stop first, and then we redecide. I mean, this is exactly the beauty of the openness, the beauty of all this transparency. And as I said, COVID, no country and no government is really ready to see and to overcome. So what is the most important is actually for the government to continue communicating what we are doing, what we try to do, what we are planning to do, and then the people is going to participate and supporting. Criticizing is also fine. I think that is healthy, but continue improvement, and we are responding and adapting with that.
Thank you, Bu Ani. You have shared a lot of a sense of optimism to all of us today. You hit all the right notes there of openness, resilience, fighting spirit, collective solidarity. And on that, actually, my last question is related with that collective solidarity. However, we are first going to showcase some of our photojournalism works in a short video on the role of women in Indonesia's economy. As we all know that more than half of Indonesia's micro, small, medium enterprises are being led by women. Hence, they are playing actually a huge part to survive this pandemic. This is the video playback.
Indonesia, tanah air beta, pusaka abadi nan jaya. Indonesia sejak dulu kala tetap dipuja-puja bangsa. Di sana tempat lahir beta, dibuat dibesarkan bunda, tempat berlindung di hari tua, sampai akhir menutup mata.
That is a very powerful video. And Ibu Ani, you have so far been an inspiration for many Indonesians, especially women, in empowering themselves, in contributing to the nation's progress. What would you like to say to women and all people being the supporting ecosystem in surviving this pandemic?
Well, half of the population is women. I think that is really the resources that we are all need to make sure that they have all the ability to unleash their potential, and for a country to be able to move forward in a more what you call it equitable way, then you have to make sure that the role of the woman is going to be equal and productive. And I think in all the policy of the government, we are putting this gender dimension in the design of the policy really from the very beginning. I mean, when you talk about small, medium enterprises, almost all the recipient of the small, medium enterprises, million of them, or even 40 million of them, they are all actually a woman small, medium enterprises. So when you talk about kredit usaha rakyat, ultra, micro, mekar, these are all women. They sometimes also the head of the household, or they are also making their own business. When we talk about BLT, that is the social transfer at the village level, more than 2.5 million is actually headed by the woman. Our 10 million family hope recipient, they are all actually, the transfer is provided to the woman household. These are all what I call it the gender dimension. Not only that, that through the many study showing that actually putting the woman as the center of in your policy design is actually have a much huge impact. Not that we don't trust the male counterpart, but it's just like the woman or the female is actually the one who actually have the ability to always use the resource beyond themselves, beyond herself. So it's more really looking at the family, children, and so on. And you asked about what is the message. I think in all generations, women really still have to establish their role because of the social norm and all the perception is actually stereotyping, providing women it's much more tough and non-even playing field in all fronts. So for the woman to achieve a certain level, I always like using the Condoleezza Rice books. The title is Twice as Good. You really have to show that you are twice as good to do the same job as a man, because you are going to be scrutinized more when you are a woman doing the same job. Only because your gender is different, that is, you are a woman, then you are going to be first asked, is he capable? Is he up to the job? Or if you are actually with your look and they will comment you, oh, why the hair is this? Why they are wearing this kind of huge? I mean, in one of the South Korea, one of the local parliamentary member, they're just showing in the parliamentary building wearing the dress, which is non-suit. They are asking to resign because they are asking as a improper. I mean, the woman is going to be commented in all aspects, which is more than a man. The way you look, the way you dress, the way you behave, the way you talk. If you are firm, they are going to be saying, oh, this is like, yeah, you call it, I don't want to to use the rude term, but I mean, if the woman do the same thing like a man, if the man will be saying that they are positive, for women, it's being as a negative. If they are ambitious, if they are firm, if they are leading, they are going to be seen that, oh, this is bossing around. It's different if you are a man, then you are, oh, good to have a man which is in charge. So these are all, like it or not, and I'm talking, this is not because of, I'm talking about Indonesia. I've been in World Bank, I discussed with many of my colleague women, my friends like Crystallin, which is now the MD of the IMF, before that, Christine Lagarde. And when we are talking about all this gender issue, we are all actually amazingly, regardless your nationality, your nation, your race, your religious, we are actually all talking about that non-level playing field. So my message to all the women in Indonesia, please support each other. I mean, even if you are supporting each other, you are still fighting a very difficult battle in this case. So don't actually feel that among women you are competing. You actually really have to support each other. I mean, really. And then, of course, you really have to collaborate with our different gender, that is the male part. I mean, there are so many like education that need to be done, advocating, and many of them is actually, and many of the champion of the gender is actually a male. When I was in the World Bank, they are all actually, the president of the World Bank is really a champion on that. So we are going to be very, very lucky if we have a decision maker, especially a man decision maker, who really understand this importance of gender equality, not because they want to be popular and so on, because they truly believe that this gender, or between man and woman, male and female, they actually have the potential which is equally very powerful for a country, for the economy, to actually achieve a better situation. So support each other and be positive. I mean, that is going to be the most important one.
Thank you, Bu Sri Mulyani, for your inspiring comments and insightful remarks. I hope all men and all women are listening to your last remarks. I think to summarize our discussion today, I think we really need to invest a lot in the Indonesian people. The 2021 budget is also directed into that direction as well. The COVID-19 is actually providing us a momentum to reform Indonesia in health, in education, in social safety net. And that's our discussion today. Ibu Sri Mulyani, once again, thank you. We wish you good health. We wish you strong coordination within the cabinet members. We wish you all the best in navigating the nation away from the crisis Ladies and gentlemen, that's our interview session with Ibu Sri Mulyani. I will hand over the platform to Dita. Take it away, Dita.
Thank you, Esther. Good luck to all of you. Have a very productive webinar.
Thank you, Ibu.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mbak Esther. That concluded our talk show with Minister Sri Mulyani. What a very powerful talk. Unfortunately, Ibu Sri Mulyani has other agendas to attend to, and we'll leave our program in a minute. But before you leave, Ibu, we would like to take a quick photo. Unfortunately, is Ibu Sri Mulyani still in the room? Yeah, I think Ibu Sri Mulyani has left the room. So we will have a short break now. We will show a video made to you by the Jakarta Post multimedia team, and then we will be back shortly to begin our discussion panel. Enjoy, everyone.
Indonesia tanah air beta pusaka abadi nan jaya. Indonesia sejak dulu kala tetap dipuja-puja bangsa. Di sana tempat lahir beta dibuat dibesarkan bunda, tempat berlindung di hari tua sampai akhir menutup mata.
Welcome back, everyone. I think we can all agree that the video made by our multimedia team was a very touching one. To check out more of our multimedia report, you can go to our website, www.thejakartapost.com, our YouTube channel, our Twitter, and also our Instagram. As a quick note, before we continue, good journalism needs your support. Please consider subscribing to the Jakarta Post by going to the Jakarta Post/packages and subscribe today for only 50,000 rupiah per month. You will gain access to our premium content and many more. Now we are going to move forward to our discussion panel session. First of all, I'd like to explain some rules of conduct before we continue. Each speaker will take turns in sharing their thoughts and views on reimagining the future of Indonesia's economy. And then we will have a question and answer session at the end of the discussion panel. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask any time using the Q&A feature or the chat room on your Zoom app. Please do not hesitate to also ask in Bahasa Indonesia, as we will translate your question for you. Now, to reintroduce our panelists, we have with us today Finance Ministry Special Advisor Masyita Crystallin. Hello, Ibu Shita. We have former Indonesian Finance Minister Chatib Basri. Hello, Pak Dede. We have World Bank Lead Economist for Indonesia, Frederico. Hello, Pak Frederico. We have Indonesia Employers Association Vice Chairwoman Shinta Kamdani. Selamat sore, Ibu Shinta. We have Sequoia Capital India Managing Editor Abheek Anand. Hello, Mr. Abheek. We have Prudential Indonesia President Director Reisch. Hello, Mr. Jens. And also we have OFO President Director Karaniya Dharmasaputra. Hello, Pakar. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over the platform to Mbak Prima. Mbak Prima, the platform is yours.
Thank you, Dita. That was an insightful session with Finance Minister Sri Mulyani Indrawati. I hope you all enjoy the session. So, good afternoon to all attendees and speakers. Welcome to Jakpost Up Close webinar. I'm Prima Wirayani, the Jakarta Post editor and your host in today's webinar. First of all, I'd like to wish you happy Indonesia's 75th Independence Day. This year's celebration is probably a different one, if not a strange one, without the usual events we used to see, like the pole climbing or a big and crowded flag hoisting ceremony at the Merdeka Palace. The COVID-19 pandemic indeed disrupts many things in Indonesia, not just the Independence Day celebration or how we live, but also the economy. Indonesia's economy contracted 5.3% in the second quarter. This is the lowest figure since the first quarter of 1999. This is because the pandemic restriction implemented in March of April and May paralyzed almost all economic activity in the country. The government now expects, like what Ibu Sri Mulyani said recently, that this year's economy will grow just around 0% compared to last year. So the government has rolled out the National Economic Recovery Program, which is included in the 695.2 trillion rupiah state budget for the COVID-19 response to strengthen the healthcare system and also soften the pandemic's blow on the nation's economy. Businesses, on the other hand, have also introduced health protocols, including massive adoption of digital measures to minimize physical contacts. So with all these massive disruptions and challenges, we now begin to think, what is the future? Or even what's in the future? So in this webinar, we try to reimagine the future of Indonesia's economy. What is the role of the state budget in strengthening Indonesia's healthcare system and the economy? What are the roles of the public and private sector? Also, the relevance of technology and human capital development in the future of Indonesia's economy. We wish to see in this webinar the new imagination on the future of Indonesia's economy from the lens of public and private sector, as well as academics and non-government organizations. This is why we have this diverse and big panel with prominent names. As you see, we have 7 distinguished speakers this afternoon. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your time. We at the Jakarta Post really appreciate it. So let me just a little bit flashback. So during our earlier interview with Finance Minister Sri Mulyani, she envisioned her legacy in Indonesia, in which all Indonesians have equal opportunity, have public services with good quality, also infrastructure that allow people to have mobility, productivity, and this should be supported by good private and public institutions. She also said the current situation was challenging, even for a veteran like her, to rescue the economy, because it's more than just optimizing the supply and demand. It's like designing and adopting a policy, because there are other non-economic factors that hamper the economic recovery, such as physical distancing measures that they need to limit the virus spread. So this is, I quote her, it's not just about pouring the money to the economy. So I will go first with Pak Dede. So Pak Dede is the former Indonesian finance minister. Pak Dede, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, Pak. Thank you so much. Yes, I can hear you clearly, and I can see you clearly too. So Pak Dede, I'll start with you. As a former finance minister, you have the knowledge about how fiscal policy works and affects the people and the economy. And as an economist, you also have written many articles on the need for the government to focus on cash transfer to boost purchasing power and speed up economic recovery. Can you share with us more insights on that issue, and what are the critical elements the government should focus to accelerate economic recovery at the time?
Thank you very much, Prima. First of all, I think I would like to say that when we are talking about policy, we are not living in the first best world. Yeah, it's very different than when you are talking as an academic at the university. Yeah, public policy, we are not talking about the first best world. We're probably living in the second best world run by the third best bureaucracy. And we cannot complain with that. And this is the reality. So I think when we design a policy, somehow we need to adopt with the situation. Don't expect too much with the ideal world. Yeah. So let me give an example. If you're talking about the ideal world, you're talking about data, availability of data. In reality, is far from that. If you're talking about this, ideal situation, then you are talking about the governance is there. The reality is far from that. If you want to introduce a policy like a Star Wars under the institution like a Jurassic Park, there is no way that can work. So we have to be very realistic. So my point is why I propose this BLT, the cash transfer, for several reasons. The first one is I conducted a research to look at how to do the jumpstart on the economy. Whether we do from the supply side first, we boost the investment, then it's gonna create moving the economy, like induced consumption later on, or we start with the consumption. I look at the data, the loan to deposit ratio declining. Why is that? No demand for credit now. And why companies doesn't want to borrow?
Halo Pak Dede. Halo Pak Dede. I think we lose Pak Dede.
Is to boost demand.
Okay.
To boost demand. This is the first thing. So that is why I propose that if you're talking about to boost demand, if you give this money to the middle and upper class, they're going to save this money. So the group of people who's going to spend the money will be the middle and lower income group. That is why I propose. When you're talking about this BLT, some concern about the leakage of the data. Prima, you are not going to spend 5 hours waiting for only get 600,000. Well, your salary is more than 10 million. So this mistargeting, that's okay. Yeah, that's okay. Because we have to be very realistic. We are not in the first best world. And then when I look at the data, the absorption, the only spending that could achieve the level of absorption quite significant is only social assistance. Not the tax, because the business is not there, because the profit is not there. So why don't you just being pragmatic? You allocate funding on which that the government could spend the money. Which is the BLT. If you introduce the sembako, it's going to be a project because everyone will ask, when you put the sembako, you should put some sarden, some ketoprak, or something like that. But if you give them money, money is more superior than in kind. So as simple as that.
Okay, that's interesting. You mentioned that the absorption of the social aid is the fastest, the highest among other incentives provided by the government. But the reality now is that the government COVID-19 response fund are being absorbed in a very slow pace. From your experience, Pak Dede, why is it taking so much time, especially during this critical time, to disburse the fund, especially for the social aid and the COVID-19 containment measures?
Two factors, structural and technical. The structural things is, unfortunately, I hate to say this, but I do believe that many government officials have a trauma. Yeah, because they need to spend the money in the proper governance procedure. And there is a trade-off here. If you want to spend the money in the proper manner, then you cannot introduce speed because you have to comply with so many government regulations. The targeting should be correct, the documents should be filled in. But if you want to just focus on to simplify some regulation, probably you're gonna lose some governance issue, but you can get speed. But if you want to do both, would be very difficult because the government official, they are at risk. Exactly what Ibu Sri Mulyani said. If this mistargeted, then BPK will come, or KPK will come, or the Kejaksaan will come, and they don't dare to disburse the money. But if they comply with all the government process, then it's gonna be, I don't know how it's going to take, before the desk. That's really the structural problem. Yeah. The second one is more on the technical. Yeah. It's not always easy to come up to design with the policy within short period of time. So let me give an example to you. If I give you money, 10 trillion, then you have to disburse it give it to the people. How do you define? Yeah, how do you design the program? It's not easy. Yeah, so that's for that reason. Yeah, that is why I said that if the government would like to disburse the money, on the speed, try to find something using the existing program. Yeah, focus on the program that the absorption is relatively high. I give an example: tax incentive. From the beginning, I said this tax incentive will not work. Why? Because if the company running loss, they don't pay tax anyway, right? If there is no economic activity, why the government should allocate funding for the tax incentive? Later on, when the economy is moving, then you can provide a tax incentive. At this moment, you just focus on the cash transfer, extend to the middle and upper class, and it's okay to have this somehow the mistargeting. Yeah, because I don't think that the rich people will wait for 6 hours just to wait to get the 150,000 per month. No way, they're not going. Similar to the online system on this Kartu Prakerja, people complain about it. But to me, this is important. If you think this training is useless, that's important. Why? Because if you think that training is useless and then you complete the training in order to get money, it shows that you are desperate to get the money, right? But if you think that this is useless and you drop out because of that, it means that you have savings. You can afford not to complete the training. So somehow this useless online program can be used as a selective design mechanism to know who is desperate and not desperate.
Thank you, Pak Dede. Very interesting and insightful take from you. We also have Mbak Masyita Crystallin. She is the Finance Ministry Special Advisor. While we talk about the state budget disbursement, Mbak Sita, so I would like to ask more about the state budget roadmap. So the government's role in the economy has changed dramatically during the pandemic, and now the state budget has expanded and serve purposes that primarily to contain the pandemic's economic impact, also to strengthen healthcare system, including to boost purchasing power through social safety net and also social aid. Mbak Shita, can you share the state budget roadmap for economic recovery and beyond? And also, what will be the challenges and what are the government plans on those roadmap and also the challenge?
Mbak Prima, thank you very much for the question. This is a very timely question, and I had a wonderful panel. My teacher, Pak Hatib Basri, has spoken before, and also Ibu Sri Mulyani. Basically, what Pak Dede mentioned before is very in line with the government view, that this year and next year, the priority for budget is actually not for recovery in the sense that you would increase output, it's for survival. So it's a defensive mechanism to save the life and livelihood of the people. So social safety net has become a priority. Of course, cash transfer is always more dominant in terms of setup of policy than other type of subsidy. We agree with that. And we're working on towards, improving the targeting and better targeting of the subsidy as well. But the 2020 and 2021 will be mainly on social safety net, health, and also, protecting the life and livelihood, as I mentioned earlier. On the 2021 budget, actually the tone of the budget is very similar. Of course, we have, before COVID, actually, if you remember in 2019, right, a lot of the organization has mentioned that maybe 2020 will be a pickup in global growth, right? Indonesia is in the middle of a huge reform. We are currently doing a transformation of the economy on all aspects, right? We try to change the value added and we increase competitiveness of the economy, including improving revenue and also a better quality of spending. We are in the middle of that because we want to achieve, high income country by 2045, which means we have to increase potential growth. World Bank, I think, assume it's around 5% before the COVID. Of course, after COVID, all countries' potential output or growth will be lower than before COVID, right? So we are in the middle of reform, and then COVID happens. Of course, the priority of the budget has to change in the short run, but we shouldn't forget that we have the long term as the aim as well, which is why the government is currently, trying to balance, we call it the triangle of revenue, spending, and also financing. If you remember in March 20, the market, global financial market volatility has hit the roof, right? It was the highest. The fixed index reached the highest since it was created first, yeah? So it means global financial market are seeing this unprecedented situation as a really tough economic situation. And without good credibility between, this revenue side and then the spending side, financing could become even more of an issue. Because when global liquidity has become tightened, volatility increase, less credibility of emerging market, for example, such as Indonesia, could create even more trouble. Thankfully, we are in good hand, right? As you have heard, Ibu Sri Mulyani has a lot of experience and she also has credibility in the market and also the Central Bank of Indonesia, that we can create, a policy where we can increase the spending for the social safety net and other stuff, but also maintaining the financing to be sustainable in the long run. Of course, our debt to GDP ratio has increased significantly this year. It was around 30% before COVID. Now it's close to 35, 36%. Of course, it can increase even more. But as I said, we need to survive the 2020 and 2021 year. If you're looking at the economic recovery budget, it's almost 700 trillion, yeah, to be exact, is 695.2 trillion. We are actually supporting both the demand side and the supply side. So in the demand side, we have social safety net expansion, not just the beneficiaries. We expand the beneficiaries, but also we expand the number of the transfer. As Pak Dede mentioned, data has become an issue. Actually, maybe you are aware that we have a database for the bottom 40%, around 37% to 40%. We have by name, by address, and with bank account number. So with this good database for bottom 40%, we can actually increase social safety net easily. But of course, to expand the beneficiary beyond the 40% with the physical distancing and PSBB has become a challenge for the government as well, which is why you hear at the beginning, there was a slight of difficulty in terms of adding the potential or the beneficiaries of the social safety net. Talking about 2021 budget, right? Assuming the recovery is as progressing, and maybe the vaccine will be found or the pandemic suddenly slow down, then you will see a pickup in the economy. Of course, there's a lot of risk in assuming that the economy will pick up in 2021, which is why as government, usually people, Pak Dede usually make a joke like it's crazy to make a prediction around this time of high volatility. But maybe as ex-minister, he also remember that regardless it's difficult, the government still has to make prediction anyway, because you need to make first best scenario, medium scenario, and the worst case scenario, so that the state budget can still become a shock absorber for the economy, just in case 2021 is not as good as we expected. In terms of sectoral for 2021, we focus on human development, so health and education remains a priority, but also we're slightly moving into ICT sectors and also industrial estate. So those are the priority for the budget around this year and also next year.
Thank you, Masyita. I think we can all relate on your statement that we have to survive the 2020. So speaking about tax, how does the Finance Ministry's tax reform agenda transform in light of weak business activities and also purchasing power like this time? What are the future sources of the state revenue, Masyita?
So Indonesia tax revenue, if you compare with peers, there's a lot of room to improve, let me say that, right? So before COVID, we are also in the middle of a revenue reform. So we are trying to expand the tax base. This was since before Pak Dede was finance ministers. And then we're trying to improve administration, make it more digital and easy to use so that we can increase tax compliance. But also we're looking at different solutions, such as some of the tax are regressive. Commodity subsidy or commodity tax, in terms of spending, it's commodity subsidy is usually regressive, and some type of tax is also sometimes regressive. So we have to change the rates so that tax becomes more progressive. So you tax on the higher end and less on the lower end, so you can stimulate the economy, and also this is good for equality. For the structural economy, so basically before, in addition to the tax base, right, Indonesia's industry or real sector value added is on the level that is not really improving since, like 20 years ago. So if you're looking at Indonesia's export basket, you compare today's export basket, compare it with 20 years ago, it's similar. It's still commodity, which is why in the last 4 years, the government has been doing a reform on trying to developing the downstream industry of the mineral sectors, which is a big part of our economy. So when you do a structural reform, you cannot completely forget the dominant sector of your economy, but you're trying to develop the downstream industry and increase the value added, right? So revenue will also evolve if value added in the industry increase. So we're hoping that, on one side, we're doing the reform. So assuming that value added of the economy doesn't change, then it still improve revenue collection. But this is not the main priority. The main priority is structural transformation. We actually need and want to transform our economy into higher value added so that, we can get prosperity for all. And also in terms of revenue, it's a higher base for tax.
Masyita, last question. Does the implementation of the recent digital tax also will play big role in the government tax reform in the future? And where is it the place of the digital tax?
Yeah, this is an interesting new world, yeah, because then even before COVID, right, now you get it even more that, a lot of transactions and a lot of type of service are done through digital services, right? So which is why the Indonesia has followed suit with other countries. At the beginning of the year, Singapore and also Malaysia in the region has also imposed the same value-added tax for digital services. So Indonesia also do the same thing. We impose 10% VAT on this digital service, and we think that one estimate, for example, from McKinsey, estimate that the digital service will be around 150 billion in 2025. So it's actually a growing business, especially for archipelagic country like Indonesia, right? Digital service and logistics and stuff will become even more important. So we put priority on this. So there's two types of tax for digital services. You have, on one hand, you have the value-added tax, which is what I mentioned, we already imposed. And then the second is the income tax. For the income tax, the Indonesian government is currently waiting for the global consensus, because you cannot do these things alone, right? Because you actually have to compete, right? It's always a beauty contest for all countries, right? When you impose some policy, you're not alone in this world. You have to see your neighbors and see whether you're competitive compared to your neighbors, right? With the growing population, demographic dividend, I think it's a little bit longer than what the government thought before. And then the growing awareness, if you see in the last 2 quarters, the growth of ICT sectors has been amazing. It's not just in Indonesia, of course, but then you can see that these sectors has a huge potential. So we're hoping that, the new sector will also be one of the leading, or if you say, the engine of growth for Indonesia, besides this other, downstreaming of the mineral sectors and other sectors that we try to develop even more.
Okay, thank you, Masyita. I think I'm moved to Mr. Jill Sander. So Masyita from the Finance Ministry just said that the government policy this year and next year will focus on survival and purchasing power, not much on the output of the economy. In your view, Frederico, what kind of policies are needed for a better economic performance post COVID-19, and what are the policy priorities to achieve the nation's 2045 vision, which centers on human capital development?
Thank you very much, Prima, and thanks everyone. It's an honor to be in such a distinguished panel. Maybe I want to start with kind of 5 things. I mean, I liked very much the theme of reimagining the future of Indonesia, and maybe start with the 5 themes of where I see the future of Indonesia's economy, and then backtrack to your questions about what are the policy priorities that might get us there. So the first thing that I see is that I think that despite us all doing things on Zoom and a lot of working from home, I think that people, will eventually, many people will want to go back to offices. So I think that that means that, the demise of cities probably, it's overrated. I think that people will still want to be in cities, but maybe not everybody needs to be in one kind of gigantic city like Jakarta. So I think that the Indonesia of the future, there will be more economic activity in the secondary cities, whether it's in Java or outside of Java, in places like Palembang or Semarang or Surabaya. So I think that that's going to be one trend. That I think that this COVID crisis has taught us that we can do a lot of things remotely, but we still like to have the contact with people. We still like to go to restaurants. We still need the kind of the economies of scale that cities provide. So I think that secondary cities and more urbanization in secondary cities is something that is going to be in the future of Indonesia. The second thing is that skills-based jobs have accelerated. The need for the Indonesia workforce to be skilled, I think that that's something that we already knew and we already prioritizing, and it was very encouraging that I think that everyone is in agreement on the need to focus on human capital. But I think that that has become even more urgent because a lot of jobs are being automated, and I think that COVID has only accelerated some of those trends. The third one, which I think it's everyone probably realizes, is on the acceleration of digitization of the economy, which is precisely related to these skills-based jobs. I mean, digitization also means that many routine tasks are actually going to be perhaps done more through digital means, and that we will all need to use digital channels more. The fourth point is that I think that we're moving more towards an economy that cares a lot about well-being, right? So I think that COVID has exposed our fragility, the need for actually robust healthcare systems, the need for an environment that is conducive to well-being and to a good life, to a healthy life. I think that that also means that, maybe for the next couple of years, we're going to see a downturn in tourism, but I do think that tourism will come back very strongly. So in the future of Indonesia, I still see tourism as something that is going to be very strong, because there is a very large emerging middle class in Asia that is going to want this well-being, and I think that Indonesia can offer a huge value proposition in that regard. And then finally, number 5, we see a lot of talk about people, turning away on globalization or thinking about self-sufficiency. And I think that this actually, it comes from some maybe legitimate concerns about what happens in trade in a time of a crisis. But to me, actually, I think it raises the fact that countries need to actually boost their capacity to produce. And having the capacity to produce is actually different from self-sufficiency. And in fact, it could be quite the opposite, because in order to be capable, you actually need to be attracting a lot of the foreign expertise and a lot of foreign investment that actually brings the know-how that can help Indonesia actually produce more domestically, even as it also exports more, and even also it might be importing more. So it's a little bit paradoxical that perhaps in order to have an economy with more production capacity, you also need to be an economy that is more open to trade and to investment. So based on these 5 kind of points of where I imagine Indonesia's economy in the future, I think that we go back to some of the the medium-term policy priorities. And they link very well, I think, in some ways with the short-term priorities. The first one is on health. Of course, the pandemic right now is not over. As Ibu Masyita said, everyone said, we need to survive. And in order to survive, of course, the health response remains important. But I think that it's not just a 1 or 2 years thing. I think that more and more the preparedness for new pandemics, ensuring that people can feel reassured by a robust health system that people can access. Great progress, I think, has already been achieved in terms of health insurance. Indonesia over the last 5-6 years is a huge success story in terms of increasing access to healthcare via the JKN health insurance. And there's a lot of positive things in the response package to shore up JKN. But I think that there is more investment that will continue to be needed in the health sector. Similarly, on social protection, I think that some of the current kind of surviving the pandemic response is important. But going forward, having a robust social protection system that helps Indonesia address a lot of shocks, they might be natural disaster shocks, they might be a future pandemic, and having that infrastructure in place so that we can not only reach the bottom 40%, but also anyone else who might be affected, who might be in the middle 40, right? In this crisis, we're seeing a lot of small businesses. There was a question before to the minister, small businesses that under normal times, they would be, comfortably above the poverty line. But if suddenly, if you were serving an office building and that office building, now everybody's working from home, then those little food sellers, those little SMEs, actually, they may actually fall below the poverty line and they need to be reached by the social protection system. So having a very robust, dynamic database and a more modern social protection system going forward, and taking advantage of the fact that there's a lot of expansion being done now because of the crisis, I think is going to be key in the future. Third point is on infrastructure. I mean, I think that naturally we've seen a redirection of the budget away from infrastructure in 2020, and that's understandable. But going forward, Indonesia still has a very large infrastructure gap, including an infrastructure gap in order to make sure that everybody can access the digital economy. We don't want the digital economy to become a source of a greater digital divide, where people who can access, who can work from home, who have access to Zoom, like all of us here, that we can actually enjoy very exciting discussions. But a lot of other Indonesians who, they barely have a cell phone. Sometimes you have one smartphone per family. It's very difficult for the children that are having to learn away. So there's still a very large infrastructure gap in terms of connectivity, both physical and virtual, that is going to be important to close. The second major point is on the kind of the openness, which I mentioned. I think that is still going to be something that Indonesia will want to pursue. Again, even in the context of ensuring that the economy itself has the capacity to produce more than what it does today, to be more reliant in a way that is also open. And for that, we think that the Omnibus Bill is going to be extremely important. We do think that the Omnibus Bill has the potential to turbocharge the economic recovery. There are very important measures in there in terms of eliminating discrimination against FDI in the sectoral laws, which we expect will boost investments. The bill will also plug Indonesia into global value chains by making it easier to export and import. As I mentioned, paradoxically, in order to increase the capacity of the economy to produce, sometimes you may actually need to import more, because when you're plugged into global value chains, there's a lot of importing and exporting of inputs, which means that Indonesia is also acquiring a lot of knowledge in the process. We do think that in terms of the environmental part, as I mentioned, as part of this well-being economy, that the environment is going to become more and more important. That it's important that both in the omnibus law and the implementation, that we maintain the priority on the environment. Indonesia actually has very good environmental laws. Sometimes maybe the implementation is not as efficient as it should be, but the environmental laws are very good. And I think that kind of to preserve the brand Indonesian, to ensure that tourism can be this great source of employment in the future, and that Indonesian products abroad are seen as coming from environmentally sustainable sources, I think that it's important to ensure to preserve the environment. And then just my last point, and in fact, I should have started with the Omnibus Bill and then mentioning some of the new spending that is needed on health, social protection infrastructure, because with spending has to come revenues. And I think that it's very heartening that everyone is talking about the need for revenues. I think that we understand that right now Indonesia is in the middle of responding to the crisis and surviving to the crisis. So, nobody would be talking about raising taxes right now in 2020, but we all have the expectation or the hope that the economy will recover. And as the economy recovers, it will be important to actually have a roadmap of how Indonesia can raise more revenues closer to, OECD average for revenues is about 34% of GDP. Indonesia is less than half of that. So I don't think that Indonesia needs to get to the OECD level, but I think that having a roadmap that is credible and that makes gradual progress towards a higher tax to GDP ratio through reforms in the value-added tax, excise tax, even the income tax, so that people can actually contribute more to the recovery, is going to be very important to sustainably pay for some of these very important expenditures, which are important for Indonesia's competitiveness in the future. So if Indonesia doesn't invest in the robust health system or in social protection or in infrastructure, those things actually are going to hurt Indonesia's competitiveness in the medium term. So that's why the kind of the medium-term plan for increasing revenues is going to be so important. So I think that I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Frederico. Very insightful and also comprehensive. So you mentioned a bit about the omnibus bill. How do you think the bill will support Indonesia's economic transformation, especially in the perspective of business sectors and also worker skill? amid this rejection from a labor union and also expert over the fear that the bill will jeopardize labor rights. How do you think the bill will support worker skills development and also productivity, which become the problem of industries or companies in Indonesia?
Thank you. I think that we would really like to focus on the aspects of the bill that increase investment and create jobs. And to us, the really important aspects of that are on the openness side. So opening up the economy more to FDI. And it's not only about FDI. Sometimes people hear the World Bank talking about more FDI and think that it's all about the foreigners. But actually, if you have more FDI, our estimates suggest that you're also going to have more domestic investment. So with more foreign investment, with more domestic investment, that means more jobs. And that also means higher wages for the workers that end up getting those jobs because you have more demand for the workers, especially the workers with the right level of skills. Now, you also mentioned the skills and the worker condition, but that is an important separate agenda in terms of ensuring that both in terms of from the early childhood to the basic education, but also to the skills training. We do feel that programs like the Kartu Prakerja, they can be used in terms of incentivizing the skills acquisition of the existing labor force to make sure that their skill level actually can command the kind of the higher salaries that we all want to see as Indonesia moves towards becoming a middle-class society with more people earning the kind of economically secure middle-class wages. So we do think that the omnibus bill can be transformative and can create a lot of jobs. But to us, that is primarily the kind of the main driver of that is through the fact that it creates a more open environment that will bring in more both foreign investment as well as domestic investment. Some of that is going to be directed to trade, so it's going to expand also the demand for Indonesian-made products, but also to serve the domestic economy, and all of that is actually going to create a lot more investment and jobs and is going to favor Indonesia in general.
Thank you, Pak Frederico. So we would like to hear from the private sector too. So we have Ibu Shinta Kamdani here. Hello, Ibu Shinta. So Ibu Shinta, my question is, what can Indonesian companies do to improve its efficiency and also its competitiveness? And also, can the omnibus bill help improve companies' efficiency and competitiveness? Bu Shinta.
Yes. Thank you, Prima. I think many speakers have talked about, how we are seeing Indonesia moving forward. But I think what's important is we as the business people, we always look at it from the perspective of what's happening on the ground now. So I like the topic of reimagining the future, and I do have very big future for Indonesia. But I have to say that at the end, especially with their current condition, we always look at what's really happening, while we're doing our business here. So I want to start by saying that I think as far as competitiveness is concerned, we have seen the data. So I don't want to share data today. I want to just more sharing experience. But the data really shows that the global competitiveness index, Indonesia is actually still quite low. So in other words, we still have quite a long way to go. So we always say that our competitiveness is a very big issue in driving investment, and also we are in trying to really expand our economy. And that's really, I think, when we talk about competitiveness, I want to maybe focus also on the manpower side, because I want to share the structure of manpower in Indonesia. It's something that we really need to focus on. When we look at right now, the number of people that going into the workforce is about 133 million people, right? And if we look at that, 55% is actually in the informal sector. It's very concerning. So when we look at the structure in our manpower, we also see that unemployment, pre-COVID was sitting in about 7%. So I think it's okay. Of course, it's increasing with COVID now. But what we need to look at also is only at the moment, only 57% workers are graduating from preliminary or middle school. So only 57%, and this is really a big concern. So skilled, especially when we talk about jobs, with the future jobs where we need high skills, we do have a concern as far as skills concerned. So why I want to start with manpower, because this is the drive is a big, the human capital development is a very big part of making Indonesia grow as a better economy. So this is, I think, one aspect that is a very important as when we talk about our competitiveness and our productivity. So while industry wants to go into a higher technology, you know, we also look into automation now, Industry 4.0, government has been very much focusing on that. But on the other side, we have to question ourselves, is our bonus demography an asset or a liability? Because at the end of the day, we have to be concerned that we see now in actual jobs that technology and automation does reduce the number of workers employed. So this is something that there is a shift of job. Yes, there is a shift of job, but it's still a concern that we don't create enough jobs. So I think this is something that we need to prioritize. We can't create enough jobs at the moment. So how do we drive that? And this is why I think the omnibus plays a very important role from the manpower side, is that we want to create jobs by driving investment, like what Frederico said. But when we look at also in the doing business, the ease of doing business in Indonesia, we are also stagnant at the number of 73 right now. And compared to our competitors, we heard already, you know, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, they're the one who's getting the investment and we don't, right? And president is already very angry of that. But I think the key is we ask ourselves why, right? So when we talk about ease of doing business, of course, we look at a lot on the regulatory. We are basically hyper. I mean, we have so much regulations, right? So much licensing. And this is not just in the central government, but also in the regional government. So we have overlapping regulation and licensing. And this really create issues in doing business in Indonesia. So that's another, I think, key elements. While business want to invest, you know, we want to expand, but of course, this is still a very, very big issue. Now, one aspect that is also important to remember, and this is where we are focusing right now, is that Indonesia is not part of the global supply chain. This is a big problem, right? Because we are, all our raw materials, 70% are still imported, mainly from China. So when COVID happened, we suddenly, oh, it's impacted our industries because you just can't import, this is our dependency is so high. So that's why the key is to do industrialization. And on the industrialization, we need to start to talk about value added product, yes, but we also need to develop our industry in making our materials. So this is I think a key element if we want to be more also self-sufficient. So we can't be depending so much all the time on the import of the raw materials. So I think that's another key elements that I would like to highlight, that Indonesia needs to open ourselves. But when we talk about open, I mean, we've been talking about industrialization for a long time. We need to be very, very clear in how we actually going to do it in a very realistic way. I've heard now so many efforts that the government is making, which is very good, but sometimes is it realistic, right? I mean, we talk about nickel going into, electric battery, going into electric vehicle, which is very, very good. I think the idea is tremendous, but realistically, can we actually make this happen soon? So with all this, what I'm saying is we need something that is quite fast-paced. We need something fast. And I think time is always an issue. with us in Indonesia. And I think with the omnibus now, it being in the legislate right now in DPR, of course, government is trying to push to get the approval. But at the end of the day, what we all need to think through is that actually the need of the omnibus lies ways beyond on specific, oh, only the business people needs it. It's not like that, I think understanding and how that encompasses in order for us to be more competitive as a country, and how it can be brought forward to the future. When we talk about Indonesia wants to be an advanced economy, how are we going to reach that? It's not just about the number, it's the actual, realistically, how are we going to get there?
Thank you, Ibu Shinta. Ibu Shinta, you mentioned about the global supply chain disruptions when COVID-19 hit China. And we understand that the pandemic is also hitting almost all business sectors in Indonesia, and they suffer a big blow from the pandemic. Can you share with us how this pandemic changed companies doing business, and will Indonesian manufacturers embrace more automation in the future, and will it remain focusing on labor intensive process?
Yeah, I think I like the word of survival, right? Right now, I know that government is focusing on the recovery program of the economy, but of course, many businesses at the moment are still thinking on how are we going to survive? How are our business still going to open tomorrow? This is including our SMEs, obviously, which is the large portion of our economies, our SMEs. I think we need a number of things, right? When the impact of COVID, everybody knows. It impacts a lot of sectors, most sectors. I think we can only count few sectors that are very much gaining instead of losing. And that's basically the ICT sectors, of course, healthcare, some of it, although they have some problem with also with their raw materials, but there are only very few. The rest are very much impacted. When we talk COVID, we always look at right now, the most important that businesses needs to be aware of is cash flow, right? We need to we really realistically can manage our cash flow. And this is COVID has given us a shock of supply and demand. So we always talk about, okay, how we can be more efficient, how can we transform our organization to be more effective, how can we reduce costs, what all this happening. So efficiency is a very big keyword in terms of supplying production. But what is more important is actually our demand, because Pak Chatib also mentioned, without the demand, even if the industry wants to start producing as much as they want, they can't, right? There's no demand from the market. So at the moment, our wish is, of course, for the government. Yes, the stimulus we need to get the stimulus, and we do have problem on the realization of the stimulus. So government, I think, has very good already policies in terms of how much stimulus they want to provide with who. Of course, we can argue whether it's never enough, right? But I don't want to argue the amount. It's more is how can we realize the stimulus to get into the recipient as fast as possible, because many actually has not received it. So I think this is not just about the social safety net, but it's also relating to the industry, the SMEs. When we talk about cash flow, we are also doing a lot of restructuring and so forth, and this is, I think, important. But when we talk about the demand, I think right now our focus is what can we control? The government can control the domestic demand, which is what? Which is one is how can we increase the purchasing power and people, and second is how can government do more spending, right? And we know that the absorption of our state budget and our regional budget is still very low, so that needs to be increased. But when we talk about increasing purchasing power, I think Pak Chatib mentioned about the BLT, bantuan langsung tunai, the cash transfer. Yes, that helps, but of course that's for the basic. Our biggest problem is right now the middle and up are not spending, so this is really our they're saving and they're not spending, and it's very difficult. Why? Because this is going back to the issue of the COVID itself. Until we can really, I think we can really we can stop this COVID. It's very difficult for us to continue business, and the health, the protocol, and how we manage the COVID is very, very important in bringing the confidence of the people to want to start spending as well. We can go to the malls; they're still not they're still not spending going to the malls, and this is some of the problems that we are facing today, because the confidence of the people, especially the mid and up, are not really there to spend. So that's, I think, is a very big part that we need to pay attention. If we talk about the international, it's something that, the international trade is something we can't really control, obviously, whether how fast can government recover from recession, how much, when they were going to actually start exporting in the same number they used to. All this is beyond our control. But what we can do is basically we need to make sure that whatever we do, we are still going to be as competitive. So when they start buying, I think the pie will be smaller, but are you going to be are you going to be part of that pie? I think that's the question, whether Indonesia can be part of that pie. So because it's going to probably shrink, and we need to ensure that we're going to be part of that.
Okay, Bu, so the businesses will use more technology in its activity.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that question. I think no doubt, Prima, I think technology, every business right now is doing technology. If they haven't done so, they will be doing. And I think what's the key is when we talk about technology is also not just the market access. Yeah, so if we're not talking about offline, online business, of course, online, everybody now needs to expand to online business. But when we talk about manufacturing industry, we talk about automation, right? Technology automation is investment. So I think the question is, yes, of course, industry wants to go to that direction. And at the end of the day, we will be saving if we do that. But today, how much is actually going to invest for that? We talk about automation. So this is something that we need to really take a look at. And also, Indonesia has not paid much attention on R&D, only the last few years. We now have the super deductible tax and so forth to encourage more R&D. But in actuality, not many companies has really utilized that. So I think R&D will be a big focus, not just about technology, but R&D and innovation in general. So I think this is something that we need to look at. I also want to pay attention that I think the ecosystem, the infrastructure, as digital is an enabler, it's very, very important, right? Because as you know now, with everybody, using technology, do we have sufficient infrastructure? So this is, I think, the homework that I think government needs to also pay attention to while we are moving into that direction. As a final, and I just want to say, Prima, that actually many company now is transforming. And this is actually a good momentum during COVID that we actually transform our business, not about the line of business, but also how we adapt to the new way of doing business. And of course, technology is a part of it, but it's not just it. This is the time when I'm also promoting, for example, how companies can adapt to more SDG goals, right? How they can incorporate SDG into their business model. This is actually the time, the momentum to look into that. We talk about renewable energy. Indonesia needs to focus on renewable energy, and we have been, stagnant. We want to have an achievement of 23% 2025. We are now actually increasing, but we are reducing. So we have to be very, very careful that I hope renewable energy will still be part of Indonesia future, because this is very, very important. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ibu Shinta. Ibu Shinta mentioned about the digital transformation of Indonesian companies. And here we have Mr. Anand from Sequoia Capital, India. Sequoia has been consistent in its penetration into Southeast Asian market, especially Indonesia, from funding small startups to technology giants such as Gojek and also Tokopedia. And through the early stage startup accelerator program, Surge, it's called Surge, by Sequoia India. So I would like to ask you, Mr. Anand, how will technology and the digital economy play a role in reshaping the future of Indonesia's economy?
Thank you, Prima, and thank you to the Jakarta Post for having me. Just maybe building a little bit on what everybody in the distinguished panel has said so far. Let me start with a little bit of context of where we are coming from. And I think we are coming from a world that is quite different from perhaps some of the other speakers. So Sequoia Capital, started as an investment firm in the US almost 48 years ago. And over the last 5 decades, we've invested across multiple markets at the very early stages of technology inflection. So for example, our partners in the US have invested in everything from Google to WhatsApp. Our partners in China have done Alibaba, have done ByteDance, Meituan. Our team in India has done companies like Byju, Zomato, Pine Labs. And about 6 years ago is when we basically decided that Southeast Asia is the new frontier for technology investments and we should start to build out a business here. And Prima, as you mentioned, we were very fortunate 6 years ago when we started to invest in Indonesia. Our first 2 investments were Tokopedia and Gojek. So it was a very sort of, fortunate turn of events and a very good way for us to understand what's going on in the market. And so we've been very actively investing in Indonesia since then. We've got over 20 companies right now in Indonesia and several more in Southeast Asia and several hundred across the world right now. And one of the things that we are seeing is sort of, I think it's interesting that technology is becoming something which, people are talking about more and more. I was reading an article, actually a report that came out by Facebook just this morning. And one of the things they talk about is how, in their opinion, in Southeast Asia, a 5-year journey of technology adoption has happened in a matter of months. And so this is something that we are seeing in many, many markets, but in Southeast Asia and Indonesia in particular, we've always, over the last several years, there's been a gradual wave of adoption of digital technology. And, for all the harm that COVID has done and all sort of, the public health and economic impact that it has had, its impact on technology has actually been very transformative. So we're seeing this across the board in every market where people are using software more, people are paying digitally, more founders are going out and finding opportunities to invest and companies to create. More investors are becoming active. Just a few weeks ago, we announced an $1.35 billion of additional capital available to us to invest in India and Southeast Asia. And so I think there is a lot of realization across the board that while in 2019, maybe technology was one of the ways to do business, today technology is the only way to do business, right? And so I think what is happening more and more is that as more businesses start to transform towards technology, there's going to be 2 types of outcomes. Some businesses are going to be left behind, where unfortunately, it's just going to be very hard for them to conduct business in today's world. And perhaps when things get better, when public health situations improve, whether it's in 3 months from now or a year from now or a year and a half from now, then some of those businesses will rebound. In the meanwhile, technology is going to be the only way in which all of these goods and services will get delivered. And so while it's a very, we are in the middle of a global recession, I do think from a technology in founders perspective, there is opportunity out there like pretty much never before. And so, I think what does that mean for Indonesia? And it's really true for every market, but I think there are some things that are particular about Indonesia. One is that this idea of technology and entrepreneurship should be applied not just to old school parts of the economy, but to every part of the economy. And so it's worth rethinking how technology should redesign not just software and sort of consumer goods and the services that we typically associate with technology startups like e-commerce or transportation and things like that. But how does it apply to everybody else? Can it change the lives of the millions of warung owners out there? Can it help do more efficient manufacturing? Can it help digitize processes in financial services and accounting that were previously done by hand? Can we move away from a cash economy and more into a digital payments-led economy? I think the reality is in today's world, we don't have an option but to do that. And so what's going to happen is some businesses will evolve and will be able to make that transition successful. Some businesses will unfortunately not do that. And in the process, many new companies are going to get created to fill that void. I think some speakers earlier have talked about this as well, but one of the most critical parts of this transition, and this is true for Southeast Asia broadly, but again, more important for Indonesia, is this importance of human capital. And I think, in the past, we've thought that human capital is something that, is an important part of technology. Now it is absolutely critical. And I want to stress on two parts of human capital, right? It's not just the training part. Training is essential. It's absolutely important for us to have the best class institutions teaching students about all the latest in terms of engineering, in terms of business, in terms of entrepreneurship. I think there's something deeper than that, and that is a culture around entrepreneurship and risk-taking. And I find that every company or every country that makes the transition to being a very technology-led economy really rewards this culture of risk-taking. And I feel like in Asia, sometimes we forget that. And the best way for us to reward these types of companies is to really set examples that young people can follow when they want to start off their own businesses. So, I would argue that, 5 years ago, when somebody wanted to start a transportation business in Indonesia, maybe they had to look at companies in the US for inspiration. While today, when somebody wants to start a business like that, they can look at, a Minister of Education who was, previously a founder, or several of the advisors on board the President's Council, who are all former advisors, former entrepreneurs. So I think the sense of inspiration and risk-taking is essential as the culture of the country needs to evolve from one of more traditional businesses to one of more technology-led businesses. And I think the final thing I'll say on that is it's a little bit of a, again, more true for Indonesia than perhaps for several other countries, is that we have to go to a world where it is possible for the young engineering student and the young graduates to go on and make a very massive dent in the economy. For better or worse, today the economy is controlled by a lot of conglomerates, and there are good reasons why that is a very efficient way of doing things. But for the new technology-led businesses, all those ideas and those execution capabilities are going to come from the young people out there. And so what can we do to make it so that the 25-year-old person, graduating from college, she wants to start a company, how do we make it possible for them to actually dream and think big and actually execute on that? And so there are a few ways in which that's going to happen. The number one is, like I said, culture and training. You have to be comfortable taking risk. The second is, we have to give them enough tools to actually succeed. One of the tools is obviously capital, and that's what we are trying to provide. The second is this idea of, company building. And that's again something that, we are trying to provide, and several other investors are trying to provide as well, is how do you help these founders build the company and get them from, the 0 to 10 journey. And from a government perspective, I think there are several things that the government should be considering as well, and they are doing. There are things like, increasing the amount of FDI that's coming into the country, whether it be private capital, whether it, as Frederico pointed out, some of the local investors and them stepping up to actually invest more and more in the economy. There is regulatory changes. We are starting to see some of that in financial services. We should see more of that. There is more of an investment in infrastructure. We have seen that play out really well in countries like India, where the government has really stepped in to create, the best-in-class payment ecosystems or the best-in-class financial services rails. And then finally, once all of these things come together, we need to have, more and more role models that we start to celebrate. Whether it be the founders of the more traditional the larger startups, or even the younger ones. So one of the things we are doing at Sequoia is we don't just invest in the large companies. We actually go out and invest in the very, very young ones, because we believe that, by investing in that 5%, 10% company where, these founders are trying to build something really large, but at the very, very early stages, those are the ones that will actually be the large companies of tomorrow. And those are all being created today. So that's the part that we are very excited about. We are really doubling down on the seed stage and the venture stage in Indonesia really trying to go out and meet as many companies as we can and invest in them really early so we can be a part of their company building journey right from day one.
Interesting. So what growth areas are you particularly seeing in Indonesia?
Yeah, Prima, I think it's an interesting question because the simple answer to that is everything, right? But obviously everything is not an answer. We have to focus on certain specific areas because the reality is every business historically that has been done in a non-technical way is now being digitized. We are seeing that pan out in many different sectors, but there are some sectors that in particular are starting to really have a high impact. The first one is just around digitization of the existing economy. Right? And the existing economy, by and large, is made up of a lot of small businesses. So these small businesses that have all been run in a much more traditional manner, what can they be done? What can founders and startups do to digitize some of their processes? So we've invested in a number of companies recently, including companies like Gudang-Gada, companies like Ula, that are really going out and trying to digitize this B2B, the way some of these small business owners do business. There is also a software layer that's being built on top of that, not just a transacting layer. And we're starting to see companies build out apps for these types of layers. Companies like Bukukas, companies that are going out and really saying, how do we digitize the way these businesses get operate in the country? We talked a lot about human capital, and we are seeing these tailwinds across the world where education is all increasingly moving online. And there are better ways to deliver education, especially in a COVID world, but even after that, where digitally delivered education can be higher quality, more consistent, and drive better educational outcomes. So we are starting to see more and more companies do that, and we are starting to invest in some of those. I think, some of the more traditional sectors, financial services has always been a very interesting sector for us, and we've made quite a few investments over there. But I think over there, we need to see a little bit more support from the government, where there is better regulatory approvals coming along, where there is more infrastructure investment happening. I think all of those things are really going to drive the next level of innovation. And what we found is in every economy, financial services, especially every developing economy, financial services is actually a very large part of the market cap that gets created. So we're really looking for that next generation of financial services businesses and what they can do to really transform the Indonesian economy. And then finally, the bread and butter for us has historically been, consumer products and consumer services. I mentioned at the very start of the conversation how our first two investments in Indonesia were Tokopedia and Gojek, both pretty iconic consumer services right now. We are starting to make more and more of those as well. Last year we invested in a grab and go coffee chain called Kopi Kenangan that has been doing really well. We are very large shareholders there. We are starting to see more people build world-class consumer products for the Indonesian consumer, and then many of them also starting to go regional. I think that final point around going regional is super important because while Indonesia is a pretty large economy, the nice thing about software is you don't need to be constrained by physical boundaries. And so we'd love to see more founders in Indonesia really go out to build regional and international products, because I think that's where they really push themselves and challenge themselves to build something very meaningful. The last thing I would say about that is it's fascinating. We invest in India and Indonesia, and India and Indonesia are two of the largest countries for the biggest messaging platform in the world, WhatsApp. But that company was created in Mountain View, and our partners in the US invested in it. So I would love to see the next WhatsApp come out of Indonesia, because this is where all the consumers are, this is where all the use cases are, and it's a matter of time before that happens, and we are very excited to see that play out.
Thank you for your insight, Mr. Anand. So one of the sectors that enjoy the growth of technology during this pandemic is insurance sector. So we have Prudential Indonesia President Director, Mr. Reisch, right now. So this is not just because the Financial Services Authority or OJK now allow insurance agents to process insurance product digitally, but also this pandemic is a critical time for insurers since the need to be financially protected is on the rise, along with the consumer awareness about healthcare. So I would like to ask this question: how has this trend, this pandemic, affected Prudential Indonesia so far?
Well, thanks, Ms. Prima, and thanks for the question. Thanks for having me. I think, of course, like all businesses, it is a challenging time, I think, for Indonesia. And we have a health crisis, financial crisis, economic crisis, all at the same time, constrained. It has been mentioned. As an insurance company, this is the time where we have to show extra commitment, I mean, to our customers, but also to all communities and to Indonesia. I think first and foremost, we have to cover all claims, and we are covering all COVID-related claims, but we have to also provide protection. And I think I'm thankful you mentioned it, that the OJK, I think, has also, I think, worked together with us, with the insurance partners very closely. In Prudential, we have 285,000 agents in 160 cities. If they only can sell face-to-face, we cannot apply the physical distancing and also the help and support and the positioning we need to have. So I'm very thankful that at the moment, we could transform all of our services, all of our sales fulfillments, into a choice of face-to-face or virtually, which I think, if you asked me maybe a couple of months ago, I would not imagine that it is possible while working from home to develop all these innovations in such a short time. So I must say I'm really thankful and proud of a team which could achieve this very fast, but also I think of a supportive regulator. We offered free insurance for COVID. This is maybe an interesting example because insurance is not a product which naturally people run after. So in this case, we have to put some marketing, some offering behind. And I think just a relevant hospital cash with 1 million per day for 1 month, if people are basically diagnosed COVID positive and are in hospital, we basically through an offering, an online offering, and through our agents, we could so far activate 300,000 free coverages for Indonesians. And if I see this demand, if there's something positive on COVID, which basically I see for our sector, for insurance, it's actually the awareness, the increase in financial literacy. So far, I think we see 38% of Indonesians are financially literate, 4 from 10. And it is important, I think this pandemic increased the awareness, increased, of course, healthy lifestyle. We get many more requests, I think, of at the moment, questions around protection. We had to, of course, act fast. It's not so much about high-end protection solutions, big investments. It's now about getting health protection, get critical illness, getting the relevant protection out in a very affordable way. And I think here, innovation helped us. I think we have, choices through agents, choices through banks, choices through digital. We have an application called Pulse, where we actually provide just healthcare solutions, accessible, affordable, with partners like Babylon, a health symptom check, or HaloDoc with video services. I think it has been mentioned many times. A lot of creativity was created through partnerships. A lot of innovation was created. And I think I'm sure this is here to stay. It will not disappear after COVID. But in this very crisis time, the affordability as an insurance provider and as a market leader, we need to be leading in providing to all Indonesians protection, whether it's as cheap as 8,000 rupiah per month or basically into an element of what people need. Yeah.
Can you share with us, Pak Reisch, your view or outlook for insurance industry in Indonesia? Because, we all know that the insurance penetration in the country is very low since very long time. What is your outlook, especially after this pandemic? We hope that people are more aware about insurance. Do you have any probably hope or prediction about the future of Indonesia's insurance industry?
Yeah, it's an important question which you mentioned. I think, Prima, I think the insurance penetration is something we cannot be happy about. It is basically still an under-penetrated market. Only 19 million people have a life insurance policy. Only 64 million people have some form of small cover. And we are not really progressing in the speed we need to. Prudential has been now in Indonesia for 25 years. We have been a market leader for 10 years. And I personally wish that the next 25 years, maybe the next even 5 years, look different than the last 25 years. Even we achieved a lot, but I think it is important that we really have to increase the penetration. And I just want to highlight maybe a couple of, let's say, commitments, focus areas, and also maybe wishes we have as Prudential. I mean, our aspiration is to make Indonesians healthier and wealthier. There should not be any reason why Indonesians can have the same life expectancy like Thailand or like Vietnam, which is 5 more years, 5 years to Indonesia. And I think with the digital economy evolving so fast, I can only share, I think the evolution Prudential went through. I mean, as a German, I can say what excites me in Indonesia first, years ago before the crisis, was instant noodle. Everyone is impatient and every services needs to happen instantly. That was our big aspiration before COVID. Now, after COVID, it's all about providing it virtually, providing it with a choice of face-to-face and still with some advisory. I think insurance purely online, it still needs to be triggered, but we need to combine this online, offline trigger of people of having choices, having an instant experience. And I think this digital economy at the moment, creating partnerships. I mean, it is great to see we have a partnership with OFO, we have partnerships now with Halodoc or Tokopedia. It is a new beginning. And I hope if we can basically work together, let's say trigger demand, but also providing leads online, offline to advisors. I really hope that we can crack this insurance penetration into something more dominant. And let me maybe share 2 more or 3 more aspects. One is the Sharia aspect. I mean, our aspiration, we see a very, very big demand. Actually, our fastest growing business right now with Plus is the Islamic offering, is actually the Islamic economy. And as Prudential, I mean, we are very committed here to the government, I think, to really be, I think, the world leading Islamic economy. I think we see the big demand, and if players team up, I think there is a huge potential for Indonesia, but with a good positioning. It's partly, of course, it is a spiritual positioning for Muslims, but I think we, at least in Prudential, we say always, Prudential Sharia untuk semua. It's a gotong royong, a principle, let's say, which I think resonates also not only to Muslim, but also to non-Muslims. And the other big, I think, part is, it has been mentioned, I think, before by Shinta, by Chatib, is the infrastructure. I think we are, as an insurance company, we carry a lot of investments with a longer term horizon. How can we actually work with regulators, work with the Bursa to channel this money in a secured way into infrastructure, helping Indonesia's infrastructure, let's say, by channeling into these longer term assets. And of course, as Prudential, another aspiration, since our insurance is not free of challenges as well as a sector, is the good corporate governance. I think it has been also mentioned. I think this is the time of crisis where we need to innovate. We need to get, I think, transparency for investments with regard to sustainable finance. We need to have a good corporate governance structure. And I think here, I think, I mean, Prudential and our industry, we want to basically be good corporate citizens and show a strong commitment to the communities of Indonesia, whether it's education or whether it's protection and investment.
Interesting. So one last question, Pak Reisch. Moving forward, how do you see the roles of life insurance companies in accelerating the country's future economic growth?
I see, I mean, two sectors. I think we need to team up. I think the future is probably not doing it on our own. I'm happy and proud if I see our achievement to become a market leader in 25 years, but I think the next 25 years will be different. We need, you cannot win alone anymore. We need to create partnerships with a shared vision, with a shared purpose. And here, I think, I mean, whether there's an example on digital, whether there's an example on Sharia for Islamic, I think it is about creating, sharing basically an aspiration with other companies, with other institutions, with other partners to make and create, I think, a new ecosystem. And as Prudential, I think, and I think also as an insurance industry, I think we need to play a bigger role. I think we feel our role yet is not being maximized to the fullest. We carry almost 600 trillion in assets as an insurance industry. Prudential alone, we have 80 trillion assets. It's important that we channel this money correctly, not maybe only in Saham, but also help developing Sharia Islamic investments, channeling it in a secured way into infrastructure. And I think the whole hospital and medical system has been mentioned. I think it is at the moment still a pinpoint for many Indonesians going to the hospital, waiting time, sometime admission, discharge takes long. I think technology, and we are trying, I mean, making a difference with Pro Medical Network, with the Pulse apps, with the QR code to make a difference in trying to crack this, that patients can go to the hospital faster, can leave the hospital in a cashless experience. This is, I think, our aspiration. I mean, not only as a company, but to contribute, I think, to the society with regard to health, well-being, and protection in Sharia. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Reisch. So, in addition to insurance, digital payment is also on the rise during this pandemic, supported by consumers' needs to do contactless payment. So, this is a question for you, Pak Karaniya from OVO. So, based on transactions on OVO, how do you project Indonesians' purchasing power going forward? And how do you see the consumer behavior reflecting a bigger picture on Indonesia's economy?
Thank you, Prima. I have prepared a very brief deck, so I just want to share several, maybe hopefully positive trends of in the fintech area. Can I share the screen here? Can I please share the screen? Okay.
Yes, please.
Second. Can you see my screen?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, everyone. So this is from a fintech perspective. Yeah, I believe that we don't need to reimagine our future. So I think in my experience, seeing any data during the the very tough pandemic era, I think we can see the future of Indonesia economy that would be highly driven by the digital economy and the financial technology. So I think I would second what Anand just said, and also Pak Jens. Yeah, I think fintech in Indonesia is still at the very beginning, but I believe that we need to go faster, and hopefully we could replicate what we are seeing, the very deep penetration of the fintech and digital economy in China, and understand that there are two homeworks, as I think Frederico has mentioned. The challenges are two, right? Digital divide and also the digital penetration. But if we see, in our daily basis, this is in OVO experience. We are having a strategic partnership with OVO, Grab, and now also with Prudential, with Pak Jens. Now, I think we in fintech and digital economy are serving more and more use cases from, I think, millions of Indonesians awake until they go to bed. But unfortunately, we are not serving where they are sleeping yet. But I think the penetration of the fintech and digital economy is deeper and deeper. And I do believe that this very promising trend, I think, should be exploited more and further by Indonesian government to how we could, as a nation, as an economy, could serve the pandemic and the new normal. And let me enter to to showing the trend of the e-money. So if you are seeing the graph on your left hand side, you are seeing that the growth of the e-money in Indonesia is growing tremendously, and now has been surpassing the conventional payment solution. And if you see the right hand side graph, this is really important, and I think this is showing the significance of the e-money play driven by the fintech company or non-bank. So if you see, from 2016 until 2019, we are seeing the growth of the e-money transaction almost 600%. But out of this growth, 78% coming from the non-bank e-money. So, we understand that, this during this pandemic, contactless payment, contactless economy, I think it's tremendously needed, right, to grow our economy further. And I just want to share very interesting to learn from Pak Dede that loan the ratio of our loan to deposit ratio is dropping, right? But in our experience, you know, the transaction coming from the e-commerce is growing very strongly, almost 110%. And also, if you see on the right, your right-hand side, the loan that we disbursed during the pandemic for the e-commerce merchant is not dropping; it's growing 50%. So I think again, it's showing the I think the promising trend of how we could utilize the fintech and digital economy to to grow our economy during the pandemic. And this is on in India. I think Anand has touched this issue. How Indonesian fintech industry can grow our financial services. So also we see a very promising trend and also great news. So we've been seeing from the past 3 years, we are seeing that the utilization of the fintech has been democratizing and deepening our financial market, our capital market. And I think the similar trend we can also see in the insurance company. So in the mutual funds, the growth is very tremendous, as you can see in the on the graph, and also on the retail government bonds. And this is very, very interesting for me. So we just helped Minister of Finance distributing retail government bonds, right? ORI 17. And what is happening compared to the previous issuance, ORI 16, so in Bareksa, I'm also the founder and CEO of Bareksa. This is a financial marketplace focusing in the capital market. We saw that the sales of this ORI 17 grew almost 600%, and this is during the pandemic, right? And this is this is the total AUM of Bareksa compared to the industry during the pandemic. So when President announced that COVID is the national pandemic, at that time I thought that, oh, this is maybe Bareksa would be in trouble, right? But at the end, this is very surprising to me. So Bareksa as an investment platform, the AUM is growing even in during the pandemic. So our total AUM from October to June is growing 31%, even though the total AUM of industry is dropping 13%, right? So how about in the government sector? I think Bu Masyita and Pak Chatib Basri has emphasized about the importance of how we could, strengthen and accelerate our cash transfer, right? This is very important for our economy. I just want to bring to your attention that now OVO, Tokopedia, Bukalapak, and several other tech companies have been helping a government to develop, I think, the Prakerja platform. And I just want to share to you that, I think the role of the digital technology and the role of financial technology, I think will be more and more important, not only in the private area, but also in the public area. I think this is a really great initiative, beside all the criticism, right, on the Prakerja, for 3 reasons. First, I think for after 75 years, we are getting our independence. This is the first time Indonesia has a national centralized platform to disburse social funds, to disburse cash transfer. And I think that is really important because of 2 factors. First, for the first time in our nation history, so every citizen now can register and then can be validated via the national centralized platform. And secondly, they could receive directly the fund transfer coming from this centralized platform. So what I'm saying, right, by adopting this digital technology, I think government could address the issue of the intermediary agents that always haunting all the previous cash transfers program. So I think that's Prima. That's what I can share. I think hopefully the adoption of the digital technology and the financial technology, as Pak Jens just mentioned, I think government should see and should look into this opportunity. And I think so many homeworks to do, and then so this country can have a much stronger digital and fintech ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pak Karaniya, for your presentation and insights. Could you please stop the screen sharing, Pak?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can maybe, sorry, stuck. So it's stuck maybe ini. Okay.
Oh yeah. I think it's okay now. So we already have an interesting discussion this afternoon. We learned that the pandemic transformed not just the state budget or the fiscal policy or how the company is doing business, but it also accelerates digitalizations in the country. So further, I would like to share this great opportunity with the audience who have given us dozens of questions for the panelists. So my colleague Dita will assist us in this question and answer session. Dita?
Thank you very much, Mbak Prima. So now we are continuing to our question and answer session. This session, I hope, will be as insightful as all the many presentations our great speakers have brought to the table. As there are so many questions piling in our inbox, in our Q&A, I'll try my best to sort and organize every questions coming in, but I'd also like to ask for the cooperation from our speakers to keep the answers for these questions around 5 to 6 minutes, so we can go through as many questions as possible. So there are a lot of issues that's being brought up by our participants. Several of these issues I will bring up is about the disbursements of social safety net. And then some of our participants are also asking about the issue of climate crisis. And then we'll continue to talk about the startup and the digital economy environment in Indonesia. And then lastly, we'll talk about Indonesia's economic relations with other countries. And now, before we continue to all these big headings that we're going to discuss, I'd like to ask for a quick response from Masyita on a statement about the omnibus law. So Pak Frederico has mentioned that omnibus can turbocharge the development in the country and will create a lot more jobs. A question coming in from our participant asked, how is the nation going to expand tax revenue if the new omnibus law is about to be implemented? There are even more tax incentives under the new omnibus law. What do you think about this, Masyita?
Yes. I think we need to be clear that the omnibus that right now is going through the pair is the omnibus for the creation of jobs. As far as tax incentives, tax allowance, tax holiday, and so forth, it's actually already, I think Masyita can share, but it's already being executed right moment. So it's not that the omnibus will give more tax incentive and thus will impact. So it's not really consistent. So the whole purpose of omnibus at the moment is really what was mentioned, is to drive more investment, creating jobs, focusing on SMEs, because we do, as you know, SMEs right now also we have problems in their part of doing business. So this is also to help them, support them in doing business by having one kind of a registration data, and they don't need to go through what other corporations are going through. So it's more on specific SMEs, and then we also have, of course, the ecosystem of investment. We have the manpower. As you know, also the sovereign wealth fund is going to be part of that, and I think that's going to really support more of Indonesian projects development. So actually, tax is not the tax incentives. The tax to help supporting the ecosystem, yes, but not incentive in the sense that what we have been receiving now. So that is really not part of the omnibus of creation of job. Maybe Masyita, you can also clarify on that. Thank you.
Masyita,
Can I clarify?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Ibu Shinta, for the help. I think I agree with Ibu Shinta. So basically, on one hand, you see tax rate, right? Assuming that the base is the same and economic activities are the same, then of course you will have lower revenue. That was the questions, right? But in terms of total revenue for tax, it's actually we have two sides, right? One is the rate itself, and second is the base and the type of economic activities that are taxed. So we're hoping that, you know, with better business sentiment and this better tax regime, then we will increase the business activity in Indonesia, which will increase the base and also, like I mentioned earlier, increase the value added. So the ones that tax actually are more valuable, even though some of the rates are going down. Then basically the total tax revenue can also increase. But of course, there's a lot of work to actually arrive at the end game. And this involves a lot of structural transformation that we also have mentioned earlier. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the answer. I'd like to continue to ask a question about the social safety net disbursement to Ibu Masyita. A lot of our audience are asking about the social safety net, and you have also mentioned that social safety net is a priority right now. How can the government ensure that social assistance is truly received by people in need? Is there a reporting or enforcement mechanism for fraud, for example? And along that line, a member of our audience also asked, understanding that most of our disadvantaged communities will basically have to restart with a year setback when the worst of this pandemic has died down, how to ensure that these communities will be able to catch on with the rest of us? What's on the pipeline when it comes to social safety net program? Are there specifically new programs being tailored to address this issue?
Thank you. This is a very hard question. I've been getting the same question over and over again, and it's always difficult to answer, even though this is like the question that we have dealt with. So basically, like Pa Dede has mentioned earlier, right? So you have two sides of the database. First, you have exclusion error. These are the people that's supposed to get the social safety net but aren't in the data set yet. And second, you have inclusion error, those who are not supposed to get it, but they are in the data set, right? So during the crisis or pandemic event like this, of course, you cannot have both maximum, right? You have to work in the middle. On one hand, you need governance and you don't want inclusion and exclusion error, but on the other side, you need speed as well. So to work on this balance, the government has leaned towards more, okay, it's okay to have more inclusion error. It's less dangerous to have more inclusion error. So people who's not supposed to get, rather than to have exclusion error. Of course, the data set is always a challenge, right? Because we only have bottom 40% of the population, but the pandemic actually involved more than bottom 40% of the population. And number two, the updating hasn't been perfect, right? So there are people who's not supposed to get it. They feel like they're not supposed to get it and they get it. And some people who feel like they're supposed to get it and they didn't get the social safety net. What we did is that to add the beneficiaries above what the data has currently have, we work with local government. So as you already hear the program, we have separated the Jabodetabek area, which get additional PKH, BLT, and then we have the non-Jabodetabek area. So for each of the region, we ask the local government to actually looking at the DTKS data and their own data and see which are the gaps, and then we fill in those gaps. But of course, there's a lot of difficulty in doing this in such a short time, which is why I think reform in the database for these things has become even more priority. It was a priority before, then it become even more priority to do. Then, when we are having to deal with pandemic situation or crisis, we can easily adjust the safety net to add more beneficiaries. And second, on the asymmetric impact of pandemic. We've heard that the pandemic has asymmetric impact towards the medium and bottom of the population, right? Because unlike the previous crisis, touch the financial sector, the bigger real sector get it first. This pandemic actually touched directly on the small medium enterprises and the medium and lower income people, right? The poor and the vulnerable are more affected, which is why the quality of spending or improving the quality of spending, especially in terms of subsidy, has become even more important because we have limited fiscal space now. It's not just Indonesia, it's everywhere in the world because, revenue is going down due to economic activity. On the other side, we have to maintain spending so that, the economy can get going and we save life and livelihood of the people. So with this limited fiscal space, we need to work smarter. So if you have less income, what would you do? You would choose the spending that matter more, right? Matter for the current life and matter for the sustainability of the future, which is why some of the subsidies, we will look more into that to reallocate the less efficient subsidy towards more targeted subsidies towards this medium and lower, the poor and the vulnerable, so that they get to, get at least better level playing field, even if not is exactly the same, but it's improving compared to the previous regime.
Thank you, Masyita. As we can see from your explanation, data infrastructure will always remain a challenge and is a difficult challenge to tackle for Indonesia, but the government is doing a lot in order to improve our digital infrastructure. And also there's also greater prioritization on subsidies. I'd like to move on to discussing about our economic relationships with other countries. And I'd like to ask this question to Pak Dede. A member of our audience asked about our relationship with China. In the process of Indonesia's economic reimagining, how do you comment Indonesia and China's economic cooperation? What roles do you expect China playing in Indonesia's recovery from the pandemic?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I think one lesson learned that probably we can get from this pandemic, this COVID, is a couple of years from now, there will be what I call the Chinafication. Yeah, the lesson learned is don't put all your eggs in one basket. So I would imagine that if China become the production base for Asia, many Asian countries, after this, I believe that there are many countries which start to relocate some of the production base outside China, come to other Asian countries. Why is that? Let me share my experience. When I was a chairman of the investment board, there was a flood in Thailand. At that time, Thailand was the production base for Toyota, for Southeast Asia. Then because the flood of Thailand, the Toyota couldn't do their production well at that time. So we saw the opportunity. So we talked to Toyota at that time and tried to persuade them to expand the production base in Jakarta. 2012, they decided to expand the production base $3.7 billion. Not because I was good as a chairman of the investment board, but simply we were lucky because the natural disaster. So the lesson learned is you can take disadvantage of this pandemic. Not saying in the using this strong word in the sense that there will be some relocation of this Indonesia-China relationship. The question is whether this relocation will go to Indonesia, to Vietnam, to Singapore or Malaysia. It depends on all the issues that have been raised by Frederico, by Shinta. So that's the first one. So I can see the opportunities on this. The second issue that's also very important. We've been in sort of like in uncertainty because the trade war. I think this trend will continue, and like it or not, will have an impact on the trade in Asia Pacific. Yeah. So one thing that I would like to discuss here, perhaps it is very important to look at this issue of this pandemic, go beyond nation. This should be a cooperation among the countries, because if you're talking about this trade war issue between China and the US, will be very difficult for the ASEAN countries deal bilaterally only with China or with the US. So that is why the role of ASEAN is a very important here. Yeah. So put the ASEAN as an entity to deal with China, to deal with Korea, to deal with the Japan, to deal with the US. So RCEP concept has become very important for the future.
Thank you very much, Pak Dede, for the explanation. Maybe as a follow-up question to that, understanding that Indonesia and ASEAN can become beneficiary of this diversification trend, in the case in which they do move to Indonesia and they do move to ASEAN, how do you think that, how do you make these factories stay within our region?
Well, the first one is we have to answer the question why the FDI, the foreign investor, would like to invest in Indonesia. 3 reasons. The first one is natural resources. Fortunately or unfortunately, the commodity price collapsed now. No one will look at Indonesia because there's, the commodity price, the coal price collapse. Not very in a interesting business at this moment. The second one is huge domestic market. Huge domestic market, but if the purchasing power is not there, they are not interested. The third one is we have an abundance on labor. That is why the revision of the labor law become very important. And then one of the most important issues for us is the severance payment. We've been discussing this issue since long time ago, but we need to change the severance payment. The severance payment work like a pension now for the people. Yeah, so we need to combine this severance payment with what I call like the employment scheme benefit, where some people should contribute from their salary, the company should contribute from their salary, and also the government. Yeah, if we could address the issue of this revision of the labor law, I don't know whether it's still on the omnibus. I'm not sure. I've not been following for the omnibus law. If it is there, and then this could be done, and I do believe that this could be a sort of like an important incentive for the doing investment in Indonesia.
Can I just add a little bit, if you don't mind, on this? I think it is an important part that the manpower clusters, the omnibus law, will continue to be discussed in the parliament. But I think what's important is the introduction of unemployment benefit. I think this is really a new, and I think our colleague here from the insurance can also understand that the unemployment insurance and unemployment benefits is very important for the protection of our workers. So this is, I think, a new element of the part of the omnibus that will be introduced, and I think that would be very, very good for our manpower.
Thank you so much for the insights from Pak Dede and also Bu Shinta. I'd like to continue because we are running on a limited time. I'd like to continue to the topic of climate crisis. Because I think this is a very interesting question that members of our audience has brought up. Right now, we are struggling with the impact of the pandemic, but many has said that the impact of the climate crisis will even hit the global world even harder than what we're dealing right now. So a question that came from Gita Shahrani asked that, with the current priority to have a smooth recovery on growth with the mentioned strategic sector, for example, like health and education, how do we balance the needs to achieve our emission reduction? Are we still on track with this, with our national priority? I'd like to pose this question to Pak Frederico before, and after that, I'd like to ask for response coming from Bu Shinta. Pak Frederico, the time is yours.
Thank you. I think that I don't have a lot of details in terms of the specific targets, but I wanted to second something that I think that Bu Shinta was mentioning before about the importance of renewable energy and the potential of renewable energy in Indonesia going forward. Indonesia has huge potential for geothermal power. We hear that Indonesia could be, as Saudi Arabia is to petroleum, Indonesia would be to geothermal, and it could actually create a lot of kind of clean energy from that. Solar, of course, we don't see as much solar deployed in Indonesia as it could be. And that's also both in terms of renewable energy and climate change, But I think about that also in terms of industrial policy as one of the industries that would be very attractive for Indonesia to have, to produce more solar panels, to actually develop the downstream industry. I don't understand why all the rooftops in Jakarta don't have solar panels to actually help in the generation of electricity. But on that specific case, for example, we see how sometimes the intention of actually developing the domestic industry, these very high local content requirements, are actually the things that are keeping the industry and preventing a lot of jobs from being created, both in the manufacturing but also in the services side. There are better ways of actually helping the productivity of the firms than the very high local content requirements on solar panels specifically, for example, that could actually help boost the industry. It creates a lot of jobs, not only in manufacturing, but also in installation. And of course, it would help bring Indonesia's renewable energy targets closer to achievement. But Bu Shinta, I think that you have more details on this.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm glad somebody raised that question, because one thing that I always remind our government is that we do have a commitment in the Paris Agreement. And, I'm really, really worried during this COVID that we are actually, regressing. So I'm continuing to really, reminding our government on this. I do believe that in terms of climate change, there's been a lot. Of course, when we talk with government, that is Indonesia still committed? Yes, of course, the commitment's there. But we have to see again what is actually happening on the ground. And why I mentioned specifically on renewable, because I can really see that on the renewable, we consistently still supporting, of course, coal power plants. We are, still subsidizing fuel. How are we going to ever compete as far as cost and pricing is concerned? So this is a very, very big challenges. We have seen also the issues also on the we talk about in the forestry, the plantations. We continue hearing stories, and I hope some of these are not really true, but they are concerned that they are but while we are facilitating some industries, mining and so forth, we are sacrificing some of the conservation works that has been done as well. But I want to particularly mention about a carbon credit mechanism, because this is one area that actually Indonesia has been quite, forward-looking, in saying that, yes, we want to start developing how we are going to do our CDM. And we have actually already a program in terms of measuring. So this program that involves companies to measure even the carbon credits and so forth. And I want to reiterate how important that we continue doing this work. I know at the moment the priority is the COVID side, and because of COVID, we are making a lot of things more lenient. Yes, we do. We are making more accommodative, but we have to be very careful that some of the priorities agenda that actually has moved forward, that we will continue, working on this. And this is why I also push our companies to remember this, that remember some of our own commitments, what we do from the business, because I think government now has been really translating a lot of the businesses on also putting in their own measurements within their business and trying to calculate some of our carbon reduction. So I think this is a very important agenda. And I think whatever we do while we are trying to recover from COVID, this definitely needs to be a priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Shinta. Just as a quick follow-up,
I'd like
if you can
to
provide.
add a little bit on that.
Oh, sure. Sure. Bu
From the
Masyita, time
budget
is yours.
side, just adding to Ibu Shinta, right? It remains a priority because the nationally determined committed for Indonesia at the 29%. By 2030, we are keeping the NDC and we are on, progressing on that. But also in terms of carbon credit mechanism, part of it is renewable energy, but actually there's also other area, right? Like deforestation and restoration of peatland, for example. These also are a big source of carbon credit creation. So the government is basically, from the budget side, we're doing budget tagging. So we're tag specific projects that are green. And also in terms of the transfer to region, we have something called the TAPE, which called Transfer Anggaran Provinsi Berbasis Ekologi. So we are doing a result-based transfer system to region. So from the government side, what we can do from the budget side is tagging the budget to a specific projects that lead to these objectives. And second, transfer to region is also tagged into this. And region can compete in terms of quality of the ecological policy and implementation that they're doing in the region to get more of the transfer.
Thank you so much, Bu Masyita, and thank you also for Bu Shinta for the answer. I'd like to move on to our next topic, which is about the environment of startup and digital economy in Indonesia. I'd like to pose this question for Mr. Abheek. One of our audience asked, how competitive is Indonesia to get funding in comparison with other countries, for example, like Vietnam?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And, it's the way we, as investors, think about Indonesia is that it is really one of the few very large economies in the region that can support multiple standalone domestic businesses that make sense for large foreign investors like us. So, the reality is that overall dollars of, venture capital that is coming in for startups in Indonesia is far more than what has come into any other country in Southeast Asia, with the exception of Singapore, because Singapore ends up being headquarters to a lot of regional Southeast Asian firms. So while the founders in Singapore are not building for Singapore, they're really building for other countries, including Indonesia. As a founder in Indonesia, I think the most important thing to try to understand is that there are different types of investors. And some investors are more suited to different stages of a company's life. For example, as founders are getting started, they need to get seed capital, which is often, coming from a different set of investors, and that might be doing venture capital or might be doing growth capital. And so one of the things that a founder has to do during the life of their business is really go out and pitch to different investors for each stage of the company. One of the things that we've done at Sequoia is we've basically tried to stay a one-stop shop for investors. So we have a seed fund which invests in the seed stage of a company. We have a venture fund that does venture stage investing, and growth fund that can double down and invest in the same company at the growth stage. So I think what we have found is that, at least for our portfolio companies, there are a lot of inside rounds that keep happening where we keep doubling down on the companies that are working, which makes it less competitive for a founder to go out and fundraise. The other good thing about Indonesia is that broadly, it's a relatively more mature investor ecosystem, which I think is fantastic. I think we should have more investors in Indonesia, not less. But there are lots of other firms as well that are kind of, setting up shop or have been around for a while at every stage of a founder's life. So it's actually, there's more capital. And I would argue the problem is not that it is too competitive. The problem is that it is not competitive enough. And so what we would love to see is actually more startups, more founders going out and raising and building companies, because the opportunity set is far more and far larger than the number of companies that are going out to address it. So that's the supply-demand mismatch. There's more opportunity than there are people going out to address it.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Abheek. And lastly, this last question I would like to ask to Pak Jens. Pak Jens, one of our participants asked about the issue of technological gap. So Prudential, we have known, is building its digital platform. What challenges have you faced in trying to create this platform in order to make sure that your audience, your customers get the very best that they can get?
That's a good question. I think it's a couple, I think, of learnings we face. I think the internal readiness is one. I think we have been very successful in a so-called traditional channel with agencies, banca. We have naturally not been in the past a partner to the economy. We have to invested, I think, in the last years heavily on making sure that we, as I mentioned before, I think making Prudential future ready with the experience, and also I think with all the innovation we need to have at the moment to sustain not only in COVID, but also connecting to the digital economy. The other aspect, I think, is on forming successful partnerships. It has not been the tradition of partnering. It has been usually the tradition of buying and owning. And I think in that new spirit, I think it is important to really find matching partners and and act fast. I think one example, Pakar mentioned it, I think, is our partnership with OFO, whether it's on payments, whether it's creating financial literacy and education, whether it's providing access. I think here, these are, I think, the new ways, and I really hope that the future, the next 5 years, it will be different than the last 25. No? Yeah.
Amen to that. Thank you so much, Jens, for the answer. And that is a wrap for our question and answer session, as well as for today's program. What a very insightful and engaging discussion we just had. Thank you very much for all speakers, and thank you for all participants for joining us today in the Jakarta Post webinar, Jakpost Up Close, Reimagining the Future of Indonesia's Economy. On behalf of the Jakarta Post, I would like to apologize that there are several questions that could not be delivered to our panelists due to time constraint. Nevertheless, we thank you very much for your enthusiasm. We will have another webinar coming up next week. The topic will be about human capital development and Indonesia's 2045 vision. So make sure you register because it will be no less insightful as the one we just had today. So before we officially close the program, I'm going to invite all the panelists to smile at their camera and we will take one last photo. So are you guys ready? I will count to 3. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. As one last note, good journalism needs your support. So please consider subscribing to the Jakarta Post by going to the Jakarta Post/packages and subscribe today for only 50,000 rupiah per month. You will gain access to our premium content and many more. And don't forget to follow our social media, the Jakarta Post on Facebook, at Jakpost on Twitter, and also at Jakpost Images on Instagram. I'm Dita, signing off as your MC. Stay safe, stay healthy. See you on the next Jakpost programs. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Masyita.
Thank you, Bu Sita.
Bu Shinta.
Makasih banyak. Ya. Thank you.
Terima kasih,
Makasih, Pak Jens.
Terima kasih, Pak Jens.
Terima kasih. Sehat selalu. Ya.
Terima kasih.